behaviors.
Class size.
Okay, I'm gonna get started. Starting to direct the conversation, I'm sure everyone's talking about very interesting things. Derek, did you want to say?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Folks, I wanted to take a couple seconds and highlight an article in the magazine I provided for you guys. It's one of our publications at American Federation of Teachers. The article is from my colleague, Jerry Roseman. Mary and I, my colleague, Jerry Roseman, who does a lot of research around building health in the schools in Philadelphia and other cities such as Detroit. So just take a second and turn to page 34 when you get some time to read. And look over the article because it's very consistent with what we're doing here. Thank you.
Great, thank you for bringing that.
All right. So, in the interest of time, first of all, I just want to say we're actually running on schedule, which is kind of amazing. I know, so this is good because we have a lot more to talk about in the afternoon. I think that's really going to be exciting as well. So, we just wanted to circle back around with the dots and just see how things laid out. We'll obviously, be spending a little more time on what this all needs and doing the tallies and looking at the colors and stuff. But I'm just going to call out the ones that have 3 or more dots just to see where some of the things are laying. So under behavior, motivated to learn, motivated to teach. We have engagement. We have better recruit, develop, and retain a talented, caring, and diverse school staff. Under health and well-being, alertness, ability to focus, memory. Looks like there's a dot kind of between. I'm going to pull in sick days and absenteeism. Socio-emotional, we have sense of pride, collaboration, sharing of knowledge and experiences. Under culture and personality, we have differences in learning styles and promoting equity to eliminate opportunity gaps and institutional bias. Building function and performance, we have flexibility in use. Flexible spaces, and we kind of got some overlap there. And that's it. Yeah. So those are the things that, obviously there are more dots, more areas of interest, so many impacts that we can be working with, but those are some things that we collectively and individually are kind of really focusing on. So, what's next?
So,
What's next?
I think with that, what we'd like to do is circle back around to the outcomes conversation and, in many ways build on the conversation that started, spontaneously off of the impacts there. So John's going to help facilitate that portion of the conversation, and we can pull up your PowerPoint if So far, is the conversation useful to folks? I think it's been really interesting. But thoughts, comments so far? Midway through the conversation.
So I don't know if I'm going to stand or sit because I'm old and I have a new hip.
It's okay to sit.
Huh?
It's okay to sit.
Yeah, no,
Better.
sometimes it's good to stand. So, just so you understand where I'm coming from, so it's important for you to understand what's inside my head, because maybe you can help me. As I said, I've been at Drexel for 10 years, looking at this process. But before that, I've been a superintendent of schools, assistant superintendent of schools. I worked out at the governor's office in Pennsylvania with Tom Ridge for a project called Link to Learn. That was back in the 90s, and that's when the internet was just starting, and they decided the legislators put into place a piece of legislation that was called Build Penn, Pennsylvania Educational Network. And as usual, no money attached to it. But school districts were going to build in their communities the use of this thing. So it was kind of interesting. They had a section in there called Shared Vision. And I became the project manager for Shared Vision in the state of Pennsylvania. And my job was to go around the state, bringing school districts, communities, and businesses together to talk about are they going to envision the use of this technology for in terms of learning? So that was kind of an interesting process for me because it got me into understanding systems thinking, got me into understanding how to bring community together and to get people to begin to talk about. But more importantly, it helped me to get people to suspend their assumptions about the world and to suspend them in a way that people could co-create a possibility of the future. And I think that's very important. So as we look at this process, what we've generated up here, what I'm hoping to be able to do, and you're going to give me feedback on if this makes sense to you or not. So one of the things, how does... is this
Down
the-
arrow.
Yeah, the down arrow, okay. All right, so what we got to deal with is two areas this afternoon. As you look at this, there's the tension between these two. So, for example, Mary, I'll use you as an example. One of the things you said was, we need to deal with the current reality of buildings that are already in place. Because that's a big reality that's out there. But if I look at what Sean and Perkins Eastman is doing and other architectural firms, they're looking at a desired future that's looking at how do we build sustainable or high-performance buildings. So that tension's constantly there. As I said, when I was a superintendent in 2 different districts, I tried to, in the early 2000s, to build sustainable buildings because the state of the art of sustainability in 2000 is a lot different than what it is today. Because of solar, because of wind, because of geothermal, all those things. But I was always hit with the thing, why do we need to do this? Why isn't normal construction better? Because sustainable buildings cost more money. Now, whether they save you money in the long run is besides the point. It costs more money. So again, that mindset's there. So you're always having this tension between the two. So what I like to do is let's run through a couple things and let's look at current reality right now. So the question that we need to look at are these. Is what are we experiencing right now? So does that chart over there, these charts over there, are they helping us to understand the current reality of what we're looking at? Secondly, what's the present dynamics that are at play within our communities? Can we tease those out? What patterns of behavior have you noticed from your own experiences, from whether you are an architect, whether you are an advocate for a position, whether you're in academia or you're teaching in schools, what's the dynamics that are at play? Third one is, why is this happening? What's the structures that are producing this? So we already talked about this, that when you talk to legislators, there's a legislative policy decision that's probably driven by structures of budgets, et cetera, and that these things are in place. So the question is, why is this happening? So what we're experiencing right now around high-performance buildings, around learning, and how buildings impact learning, and how they connect community, and how community perceives what a school is all about, how kids, what I'm doing is giving you the complexity of the structures that we're dealing with. So, for example, you're AFT, right?
Sure.
So, what's a major structure that AFT uses with school districts?
In terms of,
Now, just tell me a major structure that when it deals with a school district.
the school board?
Yeah, and what's the major structure that it does, that it creates with a school board?
Talking about the local
Begins
union.
with a C.
Contract.
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 And what is a contract?
It's an agreement.
Yeah, about the system of work primarily. So what I want you to think about is, all right, as we look at current reality with all of the things that we create over here, what are structures that are in place? So we talked about curriculum. So you're doing research into looking at how learning affects people, what type of designs of curriculum take place, etc. And what's the relationship of pedagogy? How does a daily structure of the schedule impact how a teacher thinks about teaching? And because of that, how do kids perceive what learning's all about? So again, these are the structural issues that we probably have to begin to look at. Then the other question is, what's the beliefs and assumptions we find in organizations today? We've already surfaced some of those. You know, money, budgets, all those types of things, et cetera. And then finally, the last question is, if we continue with this, what's the future going to look like? Same old, same old. So my question is, how do we want to begin this group here to deal with these questions, at least begin to pose those? So I'm wondering, Sean, should we, as we said, use the back wall, put these things up, and then have one that's dealing, what's the present reality of things that we're experiencing, and then again, do it with the way we did this over here. Write down things that you see are taking place. Then we'll put another one up saying, what do you see as being the patterns of behavior over time? Again, now, not about the future. What are you experiencing right now? Because you're coming from different organizations and you have certain types of mindsets and assumptions that come from that organization. And you also, your organization is also structured in a way that attempts to deal with these events up here. And then finally, if we just stay the way we are, what's the future going to look like? Okay, does that make sense to do the cards? Write down your points of view. We'll put them up under each one of these questions, and then let's see what the environment looks like here. So about, what, 10, 15 minutes you can do that?
We're a small enough group, does it make sense to just talk?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering is,
Well, do you want to just talk about it? Fine.
you guys
yeah.
are,
Yeah,
the
because we'll
conversation
capture it
before
on
was
here.
really good.
Yeah,
I can
okay.
actually try
Then
and
let's do it that
describe.
way.
Yeah, so-
Can we have a couple people with the scribes, plus we have the videos running, right?
Yeah.
That's good. All right, good, let's do it that way.
That's
Thank you
awesome.
very much.
Right on the
See, that's
window.
what I say, it's up to you guys to figure out how to do this.
So I think we're experiencing a lot of inequity in our building conditions and our access to quality environments.
So one of the areas, one of the major areas is inequity in buildings everywhere.
Right.
Doesn't matter where.
Well, there's a little bit of a correlation that we could see, which is the median income of the zip code.
Okay, all right. So one of
It's not the same.
But one of the dynamics, one of the patterns of behavior over time that helps to deal with that is what? Is the median income of a community that has an impact on that inequality that we're seeing in terms of building, correct?
Right, but it's also have the states taking a responsibility and the feds assuming
Right.
some responsibility.
But one of the patterns is that, the other
School
pattern
system
is
itself and
is
how
what?
we
Yeah.
What else?
design.
Go ahead.
I was just tagging on
Yeah.
what she said about, it's also up to the school systems themselves and how they approach the planning and design process,
Right.
ensuring equity.
Right,
Because that's something that we've been trying to do.
right. It's
with the school system.
it's a micro and a macro.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, but what also is affecting that, which is residential patterns, obviously, and how schools, especially at the elementary school level, respond to residential patterns.
What do you mean?
Yeah, but it's also elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, it's where people live
Where-
and how you also assign.
And how you assign
Patterns.
what neighborhood kids
Right.
Oh,
into what school.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of things that go into that because it's also how the government's, like, how planning decisions and
Yeah.
are determined because how you plan your communities and where the housing is available. You can start from that level. So as a planner, as I look at our county and what decisions were made in terms of what housing was available, what transportation was available, because in our county, the lower income or the more affordable housing was concentrated near the metro lines. And so that started concentrating the lower income communities. And so people will say, oh, you've created boundaries with lower income communities, but it really wasn't the school system creating that. It was the decisions that were made 30 years ago from a planning perspective, not from the school planning perspective, but from the county planning perspective, with their wedges and corridors, that was the great mindset 30 years ago from Montgomery County planning that concentrated areas of poverty around the metro lines to then create now areas of poverty for schools. So when you look at, to see where our areas of poverty are, they are concentrated around the red line for the metro line.
So the
You just
impact.
said something that you said earlier, and that was changing, moving from old thinking to new thinking. How our societally, we're going through that at all levels.
Yeah.
How to change old assumptions and standards and practices into a new reality.
And we're going to look at that on the next set of areas. So we're trying to get, and you're right about that. But one of the structural issues that you're saying that's important for us to understand are planning commissions.
Right.
Because they have great impact.
Right.
And that impact is seen in terms of behavior over time,
Right.
which was the migration of lower income people clustered around certain areas of transportation.
And now they're making new decisions.
But you also have the reverse effect, which I'm experiencing in our school district right now, or like in the area for our elementary school, for example. I mean, there is a generational change, but the area is still fairly affordable for being close to Philadelphia. And there's so much influx, and there has been a lot of new construction, that suddenly the schools are at/almost over capacity.
Right.
And it was not like
Right.
revisited.
Right.
Penguin Elementary.
Right, and that's
So,
exactly
and
happening again, right?
and-
Now
and-
they're redeveloping areas,
Yeah, and
again, around the metro
Metro.
lines.
Yeah.
And now new areas, it's like now there's new development happening, and so now new areas are now over capacity,
Yeah.
and they're blaming us, and it's again, the planning commission is making
like that
decisions.
network.
When you say
Yeah.
blaming us, who's that?
I'm the school board, I'm the
Okay.
school district.
Right.
And so now we're not building fast enough, we're not providing
Good.
space. It's not even about new schools, it's just about space,
Yeah.
but and it's both. So now we have schools that are overcrowded, but again, the planning commission is making decisions that then impact lots of different agencies, whether it be transportation, whether it be school districts, whether it be police, it's all the different agencies, but here we're talking about schools. So there's lots of decisions that are made by the planning commission that impact
Trickle
how
down
our,
and
that
have a
trickle
big
down
impact.
and where students are living and the concentration of poverty and who's living in what areas. And so that's one issue in terms of the inequities and these concentrations of poverty.
So what assumptions, but let's stay on that one now. So you have the planning commission, and all of you seem to say, yeah, that does play in. I know locally, even in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, they impact a lot of areas.
Yeah.
So the question is, from your point of view, what are the beliefs and assumptions that are underlying the planning commission?
Politics?
Development.
Okay, development.
They're getting
money
tax
in.
base.
What do they believe about development?
They want to increase,
Tax revenue.
and at least the way we see it, they want to increase their tax base and
Okay, so, all
increase
right.
development.
Okay, so the development, so the assumption from the planning board is being driven by taxation to increase revenue.
Correct.
Then it doesn't worry about, other areas. That's the major driving force of it seems to me. See what I'm trying to get you to look at? So you have structure. So you
Right.
said another structure was a school board. So what are the assumptions of a school board as it relates to these concepts of, well, you're not building enough or you're not, so what's a board thinking? What do you think their assumptions are?
So one of the things, the problematic things, is that the boards, the planning board, the city council, and the city government and the school boards have unique responsibilities that are separate, but they do have joint planning requirements that aren't really they don't do it jointly. They have separate compliance requirements
Right.
that keep a separation that's not necessarily in the best joint interest of
Yep.
the community.
So they think in silos,
They think it's
using the buzzword.
Yeah, they're supposed to be working together.
Right.
But the board is supposed to be has responsibility of looking at, like you said, at teacher contracts, at the curriculum and the needs of the students. They have so many different constituents, right? They've got the parents at them and looking at the parent needs, but they have to be looking at the teachers and the contracts, and they've got to be looking at their budgets. And when they're looking at their budgets, like from a capital perspective in our county, we have to look at spending affordability guidelines. And so they're trying to make everything work within the guidelines that the county is setting. of what is affordable.
So a board member says what because of all the complexity of that? What's a board member say?
What they're saying?
Yeah, what are they saying?
We're not being taken into consideration.
Yeah, we're not being
We're
taken
not
into
getting enough.
consideration.
We're not getting enough.
We're not getting enough.
Yeah, we're not getting, we're not either getting our fair share from the state.
So we got
from the
to, so we have to
county.
prioritize. So I have to think about it from prior. See, what I want you to get at, what's the assumption that's driving this? Because one of the things we said, how do we shift mindset? We can only shift mindset when you understand the mindsets.
So like in our county, this is, people move to our county because of the schools. But the Parks Department will say, no, they're moving here because of the parks.
Okay.
Really? And we're like, no, I mean even say DC has better parks than Montgomery County does. They really do. But the Parks Department will say they're moving here because of the parks. But you want to say, really? Is it the parks or is it
So
really the
it's
schools?
bragging rights.
Huh?
Bragging
It
rights.
is bragging
Yeah.
rights. And so we have this battle between the agencies over why they're moving to our county.
But doesn't that mean that there is not sufficient integration, like at that level above all those different departments? Where like you really have a common platform, and that's where there should be a better dialogue and understanding of the needs. So it's like not necessarily the school department, but really the planning commission.
And we're working on that.
Go ahead. Another thing that we're currently experiencing in present dynamic, I think, is the privatization of education in the K through 12. By that I mean charter schools. Charter
Okay.
schools.
Yeah.
And companies, private companies or organizations funding the charter school, taking it out of the public realm.
So tell me the underlying assumptions that are driving
The underlying
that.
assumption is that perhaps government is not best vehicle for
Okay.
providing equal and fair education. My
Okay.
politics are showing, but
Or the underlying assumption is that there's money to be made. I mean,
Right.
I would argue,
Yeah.
Lorraine,
Okay.
that we made tremendous strides, those of us in the equity community, to get more money for teachers.
Yeah.
And then the business community said, hey,
oh, we'll just fund our own
we
schools.
can, now there's a profit margin there.
Yeah.
When my mom and dad started teaching at $2,000 a year salary, there was no profit margin in education whatsoever. But a lot of work has been done to get better pay in that sector. And now, with technology, with
Yeah.
looking at it, that's what's going on. I don't think it has anything to
With
do
education.
with education or
Right.
outcomes, or whether
Why-
government can provide
Why
or
would
not.
parents choose that versus the other if they don't believe that the educational outcome?
Well, in Ward 3, they're
is
not.
better? So-
They don't even know.
Affluent parents are not.
Okay.
Poor parents have been sold and
Yes,
sold and
yes.
sold.
Because their current public schools are
Right,
perhaps
because
so
they have not,
underperforming.
right, because they have not been invested in,
Right.
and we
Any
still,
option's a better
Right.
option.
anything's
Okay,
better, right?
And-
And the notion that private
Yes,
is
sounds
better
Yes.
also sounds like.
And those assumptions started back
So anyway.
when? Who
The
was the
assumptions
person
on the
who did
anti-
it?
What, the
Who
anti-
started? What president started that?
Reagan.
Reagan. Remember who was it, John Chubb and the guys out, I think
Chubb
they
and
were-
Moe, yeah.
Yeah, out of Harvard and the whole
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah.
They said the private.
Yeah, but Bill
enterprise is better.
Galston, Bill
Yeah, well,
Galston,
no, it's
economic
just-
advisor,
I know.
social policy
Yeah.
advisor to Clinton, he
Yeah,
was pro
that's it,
that.
because the assumption is that private industry or privatization is better because what underlies the underlying assumption of that?
Profit motive.
No, not profit motive. Yeah, it's part of it, but there's something else that drives that.
Government is dysfunctional.
Yeah, but what does, because the free market system is based off of what?
Supply and demand.
Yeah, but there's something else it's based on. I'm serious, I want you to think about it.
Yes. Well, it's
It comes out of social Darwinism,
survival of the fittest.
survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And people believe that so take your test scores, if they're not doing well, you can get out of a school, go someplace else, that school should close down.
Yes.
Has nothing to do with education, has to do with free market systems. So what I'm trying to get you to think at, okay, we gotta get to a level, and how are we gonna shape the conversation? Well, one of the basic assumptions, free market system was very powerful in a lot of things you're talking about, and it drives planning commissions, drives everybody.
Well, the other related thing is that the prevailing value in our education system today is education as an economic
You got it.
engine, right? And so the goal is that students should go through the system and end up being able to become productive workers, essentially, and be able to have careers, which ties into career and technical education, ties into a lot of things that flow back to education. I just sent out an article to a lot of our students about, I don't know if you know, the WeWork
Yes.
companies are now starting a kindergarten with the idea that kindergartners may actually be able to start creating their own businesses. It's about entrepreneurship.
It's entrepreneurship.
And so to me, that was just I mean, it's basically billionaires who, at least by the valuation of WeWork, have decided that they kind of know what's best in the education world, which is a whole nother issue. But the truth is, that's a big driver. And if you look at it that way, then things that you may want to do in your buildings are going to be more helpful to students coming out that way, if that's the way you want to go. I'm not arguing for that, but I'm saying that's clearly the driving value right now.
STEM, what's STEM all about?
Science, technology.
Yeah, everybody's jumping on STEM.
We call it STEAM now.
Yeah, well, we gotta put the A on it too. But think about the underlying assumption, what Bruce was just talking about, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about, you know, but at the expense of what? Now, you know, again, you begin to think about these, when you look at, go back to our behavioral issues there, what types of behaviors does all of these assumptions create structurally? What's the structure create over time in terms of behavior of kids? So what do kids begin to look at? So let's ask the question, now I'm going to get a little political right now, but why do we have such a divide in the country right now?
You know the obvious answer?
No, I'm going to tweet it out. That's the new modus operandi. No, but the reason I'm saying that is I want you to think about unintended consequences of the assumptions tied into these. Is that you hear, especially as old folks, talking about there's no civil engagement anymore. It's lost. Because it's so technologically driven on where we're pushing our kids and thinking, etc. Now, there's backlash, obviously, some places try to do that. But all I'm trying to get you to look at is looking at this because of time, because I want to get to the other side too. So, if we continue with some of these, and we're going to keep developing these over time, that's going to be our homework. It's what happened in Philly, we're going to do it. We come back here to DC, hopefully go to Baltimore to do this stuff. We're going to try to get these conversations going. The question now I want to ask you is that if we continue to experience this right now, what's our vision for the future going to look like?
The same.
Okay, same.
Well, there'll be some fabulous schools and buildings, some places, and then there'll be dogs.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. See, because the other question then is, guys, is we look at these things and we start teasing these out, and we look at the interrelations and the complexity of these, then the question is, and this then becomes a question that maybe we raise to legislators, to business people too, is, all right, look, I want you to look at these, blah, blah, we'll have them well organized for you to look at, is if we stay this way, what's going to happen? What's our culture, our country going to look like going forward 10, 15, 20 years down the road? The next
Superpower in decline?
Yeah.
Have-nots.
Yeah. So what I'm getting you to look at is why you need to look at current reality and those things, and all of those bullets that we have up there trying to fit into the current reality. Now, let's go to the next one. Yes, please.
Just to introduce the fact that, different people have different thoughts about what the current reality is.
Yeah, that's right. So
There's some people who think we're just fine.
Yeah, that's right.
Some people who love the discourse.
Yeah.
And many people who feel like we've got to create a new, take the good and figure out what that leads us to the future.
So, and you're right about, so what type of future does that, what you're just saying now, because there is that discourse and that divide, then what's the future going to look like because of that over time? you know if you can answer it, you just see the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, it's fragmented.
Fragmented society. Then what becomes the unintended consequence is someone said, you know, we will decline. What's in the news right now? Who's the new superpower in the world?
China.
China. Because someone's giving it up, right? Yeah, no, it slapped my face. My point is, that's what we have to look, when you look at current reality, you try to strip away, you try to look at the data, the facts, but you also say, what are we all experiencing? Because each one of us as individuals are experiencing this too. So you're right, I mean, you know, I could probably bring in Paul Ryan in this room and he'd give us a whole different point of view of the world. And all of you deal with that every single day as you try to work with the groups that you're trying to persuade towards a point of view. I do that with these guys all the time, trying to persuade them to do stuff like this. That's what leaders have to do in the future. So again, this is something, you know, hopefully we'll do this and we'll figure out the mechanism and next steps on how we continue the conversation, because obviously we want to be out of here by 2:30 and get up on the rooftop, or those of you who are going to stay here, but we have to find a way to continue the conversation to make sense, because here's the next thing. So let me go through these. So the opposite now is you go, let me see, go ahead. Yes, you go up. So now the question is, all right, so we take this group collectively and we start looking at what we're looking at over here. What's the shared vision we're hoping will come out of this? Bruce and I and Sean, when we met, we have a vision of what we're hoping will come out of this. We're not going to tell you what it is, but no, but it's an idea. Bringing people together to try to answer these questions. Then the next thing is, all right, once we can come up with a shared sense of purpose for the future, not, and this is very important, it's not that everyone is totally convinced that that's it and everyone buys in. No, there's a shared sense of purpose, which will allow for different points of view to emerge, like you say. I think that's important. So the question then is, what are the assumptions that are driving this group particularly right now? And then what are the assumptions that we need to begin to look at? What types of systems have to emerge? You know, can we create them? How do we get other people, how do we get politicians begin to rethink this? How do we get them involved in conversation? Then, what are the patterns and trends that we want to see over time? So, let's take Mary's point of view. Mary said, if we stay on that view, we're going to have these beautiful buildings and we're going to have these crap holes. Okay? That's what's going to happen. Well, what are we going to say here is, what are we hoping to see? We don't want to see that happen because we have a set of assumptions that there should be some form of equity in terms of building spaces, because it has great impact on what?
Outcomes.
Yeah, outcomes of learning. Kids. Which then is our future. The other questions we're going to think about is, as educators, what's our role? We're trying to shape the future. Now, do we think that? Do we look at it? Is that part of our conversations? Then, what system structures then do we need to create, even within this group, within your own organizations? What patterns and trends do we wish to see over time? So again, we don't want to see that dichotomy between those types of buildings over time. And then finally, what are some of the events that we're going to see? Well, maybe there's going to be some communities that are going to explore new ways of putting buildings together that are not the monolith schools that we have today. So, let me just throw that out. Comments, questions, fill in the blanks up there. What do you think? What's our purpose?
Figure out what questions to ask.
Okay.
I think there's an elephant in the room too, in the sense of technology, because in some ways we can't predict some of this, and that to me is always something that I'm like, we talk about flexibility and we talk about doing these things and we so that we can grow, but it's grow with what? And how is it going to change, you know, and looking at the cultural differences just between one generation and how they absorb technology and use it as part of the curriculum, and that my kindergartner is getting taught robotics and coding, and that they've redone how we learn math so that it's on a base 10 system, or well, it's always on a base 10 system here, but that it's a coding system, that my husband, who's a computer programmer, is like, oh, core math is just so you can think like a programmer. And so I think how, and the evolution of we need STEM to STEM to now STREAM is indicative of like, we need to be the next and the best and the greatest, but we don't quite know what that is or how it's going to be. So yeah.
Right, but I think the technology stuff loses the fact that we're human beings with children that actually have a very long childhood and adolescence, and that it takes being in community and under supervision and for actually a long time. And so that's such a universal piece that, I know I find sometimes when people say, oh, why do we even need schools at all? And I'm thinking like, well, so you're going to leave your 7-year-old
learn how to be a human being, how to interact.
So I think we've got a lot to hang on to.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're right that sort of what we're going to be talking about with kids as they're growing up is going to be different.
I totally agree with you, and I also think that we're missing the point of actually what STEAM or STREAM or anything else is all about. It's actually about finding the intersections between all the different disciplines and how they affect each other. It's not actually, I wish people would sort of get away from the buzzwords. I mean, let's think about it. This is a very old concept. It's called the one-room schoolhouse. And I think that the more interaction we can have and the more interdisciplinary work that we can have and the more connectivity that we can have, the more successful our kids are going to be. So, but I actually don't think, what's interesting to me is how little the experience in the classroom that is meaningful is actually impacted by technology. It's much more about the interaction that they have with people face to face. And the other thing is the statistics that are coming out with like stress, for instance, in teenage girls and how they're skyrocketing. And I would argue that it's interesting that the boys aren't there as well, because in my boys it is, and how it's directly related to how much online time they have. And I think that we need to I
think there's going to be a push, like a counterpoint to, kids' faces and screens to, kind of the let's get back to our roots and like talk face to face.
And when I talk about this with groups, I always distinguish that issue of flexibility to adaptability.
Yeah.
Because the problem is if you don't know what you're building because of the uncertainty of whatever it is, it's not just in the education field, it's in the commercial real estate field, it's in our entire society. There's an uncertainty that we have to respond to in the way we teach and in the way that we build schools, and that is it should be adaptable for anything that we're doing, any way that we're teaching. Other than in the built environment that you're putting more power in a particular room or not, because to make a maker space versus a general classroom space, we still sometimes have to address the built environment in a way in the area of uncertainty and making it as adaptable and efficient as possible for whatever style of teaching, whether we're doing regular sitting around on the floor or whether we're plugging in robots or whatever we know the uncertainty is from technology or whatever our society is in the future. So I really like to distinguish, because people don't think of flexibility and adaptability in quite the same way.
The other thing that just one more thing, and when everybody's sort of been talking about how we're going to build new spaces or even adapt old spaces, I think though that until we sort of change our perspective on maintaining existing spaces, that you cannot continually take from the maintenance budget and just buy one more teacher. Because the reality is that the reason all these buildings are so awful is because we have 40-year-old boilers and 40-year-old air handling systems, and these buildings, any building that you build today will be those crappy buildings in 4 years if you do nothing to them.
Infrastructure planning is essential.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
Yes.
Infrastructure
Maintenance. It's just as important to maintain it as it is to build new, because otherwise, and the reason why all those 1920s buildings did so well is because they were designed without systems. They functioned just because they functioned as like the wall systems and the window systems and everything functioned as a holistic thing without all these things that then mucked it up. The reason why we have so much trouble with mid-century modern buildings is because that's when we introduce systems and they're all designed to fail. And one of the things I struggle with my clients constantly is like, let me invest your money in something that's going to last.
So there you go.
Let me
Either
invest your
Are we
money.
designing to fail, or are we going to design are we designing to, the microwave generation, get rid of it
Yep.
cheaply, which is what a lot of legislatures are saying, build it cheap, because then you can build two of them. That's the argument that we're being given in the state of Maryland. Oh, you can build two over 40 years versus one, never thinking about the impact that it has on the teachers, on the institution, on the schools, on the children. It's a thinking about something from a
Plan
perspective.
obsolescence.
One of the things we might want to look at another industry to go along, that it's not just schools in terms of buildings going out of style or out of fashion or because of technology changing. Look at the healthcare industry. Okay? So they have to face the same issues in terms of advances in medical technology, just advances in medicine. They build a hospital that building's got to stand for 30 years or more. So how do they anticipate, what will be needed or what will be happening in the medical field? And yet to put up that building now, I think perhaps the educational field could either look to see how they think about these things. One of the things I try to do in my design programming class is to get students to think of scenario planning, which I borrowed from the healthcare industry, to think of, okay, if this is the scenario and this is the scenario 5 years in the future, how do we build a building now that could respond to either of those scenarios, which goes back to the adaptability. But it's really hard. I mean, you need lots of different kinds of people around the table to anticipate in the industry what will be happening 5 years from now, that it could go this way, it could go this way. How do we build for that? And I think the healthcare industry is doing that kind of, so we might think about what models are they using. And extrapolate perhaps some of that to education.
So we should go cross boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, go cross boundaries.
I think a shared vision is kind of, the interdisciplinary aspects of things and having, whether it's moments like this where different perspectives to come together, but doing it intentionally. Where, that to me, that would be a shared vision, is that, not only a shared vision, but a collective coming together to say, we need a shared vision, that it's not a siloed activity.
So if we take your ideas, and your ideas, and say that, one of the things the educational process should deal with in terms of preparing the next generation is knowing how to deal with unpredictability, uncertainty, flexibility, creativity, adaptability, which then ties into all of these areas.
the title of here.
Slow down. The tape will.
That's that growth mindset.
Absolutely.
We have the ability for students to think that they can change and adapt and grow and understand how they might do
Deal with
that.
diversity.
And that's the beauty of career and technical education. It teaches kids to think critically, right? And I think I love that. That's like my favorite part of my portfolio is CTE. I mean, that's all I talk about at the time. That's what
And what it does is it crosses all of your domains if you begin to think about in terms of a design point of view.
Well, I mean, I think it came up earlier on the planning work and planning issues, but I think it's going to come up it's going to be a part of a future that solves problems, which is there has to be on the governance side more integration of our municipal sort of sectors, whether it's the land use and the transportation and stormwater and education and community centers.
To your point also, this hasn't come up yet, and I think it should. School buildings should be considered laboratories in many ways. I mean, just personally, I feel like, I certainly didn't grow up in a laboratory setting in school, but I think when I was coming up in school, computer science language was Pascal, which is obsolete. But if there were a laboratory setting, yeah, exactly, right? You're like, what?
I was even before you. I'm thinking of languages that are going.
Right. That's a laboratory.
It's not a laboratory study.
No, by no means.
I'm just saying. Some people look at it that way.
I know.
So a building should teach.
Yeah.
A building should be a learning lab.
Right.
The building should teach. You know, that's what it is. That was some of the arguments I used with like school board members. They looked at me like, what the hell are you
That's why
talking
museums
about?
are so successful.
But University
Yeah.
of Maryland, University of
Yeah.
Maryland's campus, their School of Engineering building is a great place to take students to show them. Has anybody else been there? Where, you know, where the walls are open and you see the hoist systems, I mean, the entire, they've done what everybody thinks that they'd like to do. And you see inside the walls, you see under the floors, you see, actually, they just created the whole building that way so that, and I've been really trying to get our architects to provide me designs that offer those things
Yes.
as part of all of the buildings that we're doing, because the building in itself should be a laboratory, it should
Sure,
teach.
yeah.
And it's not, it doesn't cost more to do it. It's a way of thinking. The field of architecture, they're not plugged in my opinion, to educational, in some ways, in terms of helping educators to achieve their goals in some of those ways. Those are areas where the architecture industry would be much more helpful.
See, what you just said is so great. A building should be a way of thinking. Think about that, yeah. It should be a way of thinking, because if I'm inside of a building and I look at it, what impact does that building have on me? We started playing around with that over there. You know, open space, what does that mean, you know, et cetera. So it is, it should learn, you know, it should teach, it should learn, because when kids are inside of a building that is, that's a learning lab,
They see how it's built.
it tells
They see
them.
physics,
Yeah.
they see math,
Yeah.
they see, astronomy, they see everything. And so that's a way that could be really helpful.
And in
I
the
think-
common spaces, they see civics, because I'm
I
in
think
civics.
so, yeah, civics. I think buildings also teach something more abstract, such as, one example, I'll give competence. So I'll give you an example of a child care center that I worked with in upstate New York, where the architect had considered that we've got 4-year-old kids, so the sinks need to be at a certain height, but forgot to think about the reach of a 4-year-old. So the fixtures were too far back. So what the school had to do was provide a step stool, which is fine at home, a step stool, but not in a purpose-built child care setting. So the teachers were always afraid if the step stool was too high, the child could fall over into the basin, or if it was too low, they always had to ask a teacher to come help them turn on water just to wash their hands after a messy child play activity. So what that was, my point as a psychologist was that a long-term use of that in one very small way was teaching helplessness.
Yeah.
I am not competent to wash my hands and to participate in an activity. The child cannot voice that, but that's what that on long-term basis is teaching. So spaces can teach helplessness, or they can teach competence. That's at a preschool level, but I think it happens in other ways too, at a higher level. Noise in classrooms, where children have stopped paying attention because it's just too noisy. So they learn, I can't pay attention, okay? So I think buildings do teach either a sense of competence or a sense of helplessness.
Happens
So
all
where
the
does
time
that-
in accessibility.
Where does that fall on?
Yes, accessibility issues, yes, definitely.
It's a common thing, not only
Yes.
in schools, but in our city planning in general.
Yes.
Because of certain standards that we use have become the norm, which they aren't really even necessary. I mean,
Okay,
You know, let it have some daylight, let it have maybe less daylight, to like, you know, that sort of thing, but build it in as a natural zone. But then that can also be identified as a zone. It doesn't have to be a zone where, you know, or a project zone. It can serve multiple realities with some people like L-shaped classrooms. I mean, it's not, doesn't have to be a big L.
I don't know, my folks know what happened.
I do a lot of reinforced occupancy evaluations, and that represents our economic and also senior living, so overseeing all the research.
We actually
actually did L-shaped
He
classrooms.
must have walked right by.
L-shaped bus for the teachers.
Magic show.
We had a zone that was a sort of a normal size, say,
Yeah, that's true too, yeah. That's a good idea. I didn't think of that.
Find an extra one.
Yeah, find that shit. I can do it, Tom.
Next time we touch me, I'm gonna.
They didn't feel comfortable sending out somewhere else to do small group work that they had space.
Hi, Janice. I'm sorry, I just did this with my hand.
Yeah, we have a lot.
Something like that. But you can find the slide.
No, just this, just this little
So where's
section.
your?
Okay.
Is there a satellite campus?
This is it.
This is the campus.
This is the campus.
Gotcha, Tom, you're addressing the floor.
You are in the campus.
All right, makes sense.
And we're starting an EDD program here in January. So we have open houses.
Because there's one in, is it Pittsburgh?
No, this one.
And I mean,
Where am I? I know there's.
It used to be Harrisburg.
Harrisburg.
That's cool.
Harrisburg.
Nope, it's close to
No problem, it's just a matter of a city or?
We have open houses.
family for us, so he's still strong ties.
So what classes are they? Are you doing?
Two sections.
Bruce invited our organization. Oh, so someone from. I got it. Trickle down. Yeah, well, I went to the superintendent with the business side, kind of just like figured it was. Well, we probably not creativity, but.
I'm a superintendent. Good business manager, but understand finance, and you have to bring
Well, I think we believe, yeah, it was very. Because I love talking to guys, and I wanted, I really, I mean, I'm way more creative.
It's a long day. And it's
But that's why I went that direction, because I don't know it. I figure I can learn it.
that was me, because I've always been
in my world.
the school boards look at you like,
I don't even know.
must be special.
I guess it's okay.
I know.
I am learning. Because I don't know how much more I can.
Wherever there's not like an active name tag, that's good. This one here, that one there.
They do mine.
Kind of risky. So I actually drive down there. We should talk. You know, come in. Like, I like that. I like this very consistent meetings. I'm also going to talk about your volunteers.
Like, they have 16 cases. So like, one with, technology. It's not clear at all. There's no Exactly, that's why I said, right, so
I'm an ED as what, graduate? 7, 12, something like that.
We got Marcus. We got
It's definitely special.
She actually
Yeah, especially, but then we go back to the administrative side, there's parents meetings, stuff like that.
even if we're exactly
And that was,
They're all you can see, 817 is a different school.
yeah, 8:30, so we have 8:36, that's like that. Yeah. I don't understand how this is, so we actually have from now until the and originally it was supposed to be, you had to type it all up. I mean, like, so if I I'm doing, I gotta like cut the people out, so yeah, exactly.
So you're doing the interviewing, doing the transcription, and doing the coding.
Well, she's taking the transcription off, do that at the beginning of, that'll be like the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Of next semester. Well, now it's just like how to, you know, how to bring experience. But if I were to go, like, I don't want to interview that. So I'm trying to just find
Okay, no problem.
Is it working? Is it working, John?
I did.
Very good.
So your role in the university?
Occasionally
I'm
I do that.
associate professor at the architecture program.
And what do you mostly, like, what's your thing?
My thing is actually, so I don't have that much time for research. I used to be the program director, and I'm going to be that again very soon.
Yeah, if anybody wants to put their coats in the coat closet instead of on your chair, feel free.
But my main research is contemporary architecture. I'm teaching
No, actually, it's up on the front door, so it's kind of to the side.
and I've written my dissertation on contemporary Finnish school architecture. So I researched a lot of case studies about schools in Finland, starting in the 90s.
And did they do sort of a before after in their modernization of infrastructure?
Not really. I was looking at like figuring out the design parameters because I realized that the actual design was over time. So it's that like why I need to use this and what to open and so on. So I tried to understand the process and the communication the different stakeholders had, and then looking at okay, what did the pedagogical program mean for ultimately what happened to the architecture? Because they do
Oh, that's how they
public school.
Yeah.
And with that, they obviously, they have a range of translations of what the pedagogical concept of the program are. And that may impact on how it develops. And how they develop in a lot of schools for a lot of
They come in just introduce these bills.
So I wonder what that looks like in terms of how you actually engage with this competition, how you design competition.
Yeah.
Are really engaging your stakeholders in a very
All right. I think we'll get started. So welcome. Thanks everybody for coming today. We appreciate it. On behalf of Drexel and our colleagues from Perkins Eastman, we're really appreciative that you could come today. I think our intent is for this to be a very productive and useful beginning of a set of conversations that hopefully you'll find productive both individually and in terms of advancing the fields of both architecture and education. So I am Bruce Levine, and I wear numerous hats for Drexel University. So I am the director of this center in which you sit. I'm a member of the faculty of the School of Education. I direct the Education Policy and Global and International Education program, and I also direct something called the MS in Education Improvement and Transformation. And it's kind of with that hat that I am most connected to today's event, but all of it is sort of relevant in a way. And we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the genesis of this event and the agenda for the day in a few minutes, but I thought we would start perhaps by just sort of going around the room and having everybody introduce themselves, maybe just your name, your affiliation, and maybe a couple of sentences about why you're interested in what we're doing here today, if that makes sense. Emily, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. Hello, good morning. I'm Emily Shimoleski. I'm with Perkins Eastman. I'm the senior design researcher for the firm. So I oversee firm-wide research, but I specialize in K-12 research as well as senior living. I have a background in architecture as well as environmental psychology, so I'm coming in from both the design and kind of environment behavior side of things.
My name is Tom Mosca. I'm from Philadelphia with the Drexel, and I'm studying now, kind of figuring out how to do a dissertation, kind of see where research may lie, and I think this is invited by Dr. Gould, kind of what questions could arise and how could a study kind of help from that perspective, maybe moving this kind of stuff into Philadelphia and what may be needed. So, nice to meet you guys.
Hi, I'm John Gould. I am a colleague of this gentleman up here. I also been at Drexel 10 years now, and before that was superintendent of schools and had to deal with buildings. So I'm building buildings, and it's an interesting story. And also I am the program director for the master's program in educational administration and higher education. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Janice Szymanski. I work with DCPS on their facility planning and design team. I'm fairly new to the group, but I basically oversee all major modernizations and any kind of major new building that DCPS does. A little background on myself, I'm also an architect, specializing in K-12.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Debbie Schieffer. I'm with Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm the senior planner from CPS. I've been there 26 years now. Working, I wear many, many hats there, but the hat for here today, help with the design of schools. I'm in charge of all the educational specifications, so I work with all of the curriculum folks, so I have a real interest in how the design of schools impact the education and the delivery of programs and vice versa. So I always tell everyone that I'm the bridge in the school system of the operational side and the educational side, because they often don't talk to each other, but I make sure that they do talk to each other. So I'm always really interested in how design impacts the delivery and impacts the students and teachers. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, that's perfect for what we're talking about. Good morning, I'm Sean O'Donnell. I lead the school design practice for Perkins Eastman. So, while that's a multi-office, multi-center practice, and then we've got representatives of Boston and DC and Pittsburgh here. I'm based here in Washington. So excited about this topic. I think we've focused the practice in many ways on this topic, and so this is, I think, the future of our practice. So thank you for joining us for the conversation.
I'm Janice Silsby. I'm from the Boston office of Perkins Eastman, part of the K-12 practice area, as well as actually 4 others. But I think that for me, it's always interesting to really understand how the built environment actually affects people and their true, health and well-being. And I think that the most experience I bring to this topic is actually being the mother of 2 boys. That one's 16, one was 18, just about ready to go off to college, and having gone through the system and understanding where education tends to fall short and where education does a really good job, informs the way I, do all of my projects.
Good morning, I'm Mary Filardo from the 21st Century School Fund, and we work on the intersection of education and design and policy and planning, and are particularly interested and concerned about what the planning and design processes look like in terms of engaging the lay stakeholders and the end users in the buildings, that they, I think, sometimes get short shrift. And I also swore to my friend Jay Roseman that I would be sure to make sure that in this conversation we're not forgetting about the buildings that are there and the conditions and sort of what it takes to work with existing infrastructure, and both from an educational perspective, how you repurpose what's there, but also how you address the real challenges that are out there on our systems, our building systems, and the kind of conditions they're leaving kids with in terms of mold or air quality or other kinds of things. So I think I'm hoping that we'll not be just in the lofty territory of new school design and modern thinking, but that we'll not forget that there's people, millions in these schools right now that need important.
My name is Ulrika Altmüller-Lewis. I'm on the Drexel faculty in the architecture program, and I'm teaching also the environmental psychology classes, and I connected with Bruce because I wrote my PhD about educational environments, and specifically I was researching contemporary school architecture in Finland starting in the 1990s, where they started to change the process, did much less with, okay, so this is how a school has to look like. They took away a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles to facilitate a dialogue ultimately, to allow a development of new schools, but also schools in existing buildings. They were not necessarily always schools, which is what you were talking about a little bit, to help create spaces or learning environments that fit to the pedagogical ideas and programs and how teaching and learning is actually taking place today.
Hi, I'm Anissa Hemming. I'm the director of the Center for Green Schools at the U.S. Green Building Council. We're best known as the developers of the LEED rating system. The Center for Green Schools is really on the communication advocacy research side of the organization, and so we've actually done quite a lot of work on environmental health in schools. 2 pretty recent literature reviews, one in 2012 that we put out and one that we worked with Harvard School of Public Health on just last year, that are both pretty great foundations for the conversation. And then we're also working with the EPA on with their 7 research teams that have received STAR grants to study environmental health in schools around the country, trying to make sure that when that research is completed and out there, that we're able to get it in the hands of the people who can make good decisions about how to impact both the schools that exist and new schools. So happy to be part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Derek Figures. I work for the American Federation of Teachers. I'm a lobbyist. I do government relations on a host of issues, but this is one of the issues I like a lot. And really, I've worked with Mary in the past, at least on getting legislation introduced, but not necessarily enacted, but she speaks of Jerry Roseman, so I'll bring you guys tidings from an article he wrote and a couple of other pieces that we've done in the past around school building conditions. That cites some of you guys' work and research as well, so. Great.
Hi, I'm Katie Herbert from Perkins Eastman. I'm a sustainability specialist. So in addition to what everyone else at Perkins Eastman has spoken to and the work we're working on, we've also been doing a lot of pre and post occupancy of our schools projects. So we're really interested to see how else we can start to really measure the outcomes of our designs and keep making sure we're improving them as we go forward.
And I'm Heather Howergy, also sustainability specialist working with Katie in our DC office. And I have a background in architecture, and specifically in relation to this pre and post occupancy evaluation process that Katie's mentioning, I'm really passionate about measuring the indoor environmental quality in spaces, the daylight, thermal comfort, acoustics, air quality, and we'll go into a lot of that more today, but that's kind of my area of passion.
Great, so I think
Lorraine took this as well.
That's right, go ahead. Back to Lorraine.
My name is Lorraine Maxwell. I'm a professor at Cornell in the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis. I'm an environmental psychologist, and I study children's environments. Prior to my time at Cornell, though, I'm from New York City and lived there and worked for an architectural firm as a facilities programmer. I'm not an architect, but I had a master's in urban design. I'm very interested in schools. Much of my research is centered on the role of the physical environment in children's learning, but also more in general child development. And so I'm very interested in how schools support learning, how schools support child development, and supporting those who design schools as well. I teach our architectural programming class in our department, helping students understand how to work with the potential users of spaces as they develop their plans.
Great. So this worked out even better in terms of different perspectives than I think we even initially imagined, Sean.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting, so thanks everybody for joining us and sharing the conversation.
Yeah, and there's a few more people who should be coming in a little late, and then I can also tell you that there's a number of other people who said they wish they could join, and hopefully will get involved with us later on as we continue this, including Debbie, the former Montgomery County School Superintendent, and Josh Starr, who said he was
School Board, National School Board
Association.
Council.
Yeah, so a bunch of other people. So a lot of interest in the topic, which is great. So I thought just provide a little bit of context. I'd talk about the genesis of this initiative a bit. And I'll just start by talking a little bit about Drexel, which will explain this. So for those of you who don't know, Drexel is Urban University. We call ourselves locally engaged. And we're about 25,000 students in Philadelphia. So mostly known, I'd say, for our engineering school and our co-op program, but there are others of us like Ulrika, myself, and John who work in other parts of the university. And one of the parts is the School of Ed. And our focus is heavily on urban education, interdisciplinary research, and also on education leadership and policy. So I think you can see how that might connect to this conversation. Within the school, there's also an initiative called Critical Conversations in Urban Education, for which I am the co-chair, which really just provides a vehicle for the Drexel community to engage, mostly in Philadelphia so far, but since I'm in DC, now in DC, with the outer community about urban issues and those affecting urban education. And so, to me, again, this issue ties into that. And then as a director of the DC Center, we see this as a platform for bringing our assets in the form of faculty, students, and others together with people like yourselves from outside to deal with issues that are of contemporary concern. So a chance for people to engage around important ideas. So all of that is the background, but actually the spark that set this all off was one of these serendipitous occasions that so often lead to positive things. I was at a reception down in Southwest DC, and I was admiring Perkins Eastman, photos of Perkins Eastman's work down at the wharf on the waterfront, and I turned to the guy next to me and I said something like, "Yeah, it's really nice over there." He said, "Well, that's good because I actually worked on that." And so We started talking, and when he found out I was in education, he said, you really need to talk to my colleague, Sean. He's doing some really interesting things in the field. And so it sounded like a great idea, since that's a big part of what I'm supposed to do here in Drexel, is connect with interesting other people. So we basically spoke, and eventually we had lunch up on 14th Street, had what I thought was a great conversation, and we really turned up a lot of potential areas for collaboration. But I think we decided that we needed to put a stake in the ground and start with something concrete. So after some internal conversations in each of our respective organizations, and then meeting with people like Mary and getting some input from them, we really decided that it would be great if we could start driving a conversation around the connection between architecture and school buildings on the one hand and educational outcomes on the other, to hopefully help influence the course of what we do with school buildings and construction going forward, with all the attendant impacts that can have on the education system. And so certainly sitting in Philadelphia as we are at Drexel, with enormous physical facility needs in the school district, that idea really resonated. And so our idea was to convene a group of people, practitioners, academics, architects, educators, other interested parties, and begin a dialogue about what we know about those connections to date, and then where the gaps are, what we need to do in the future to further drive that conversation and have a positive impact. And so, you all are the convening, and really that's why we're here today. I mean, that's basically how we got to this point.
Hey, Bruce?
Yeah.
I just want to add one thing.
Sure.
You see the word up there, well, it's two words, educational leadership. As part of our EDD program, and hopefully Tommy can attest to this if you want to talk to him and find out what I'm saying is true. One of the components that we're very much interested in is creating the next generation of leader in a school, whether it be a superintendent, whether it be building principal, whether it be a teacher, that we're looking at going forward as opposed to trying to maintain what we presently have or to keep the past going on. And that's across physical space of buildings. Mary's commented what she said about the buildings. So how do we retrofit our present buildings to deal with reality of learning? And then the other side of it is how do we get leaders to understand the interdependence of the school to its community, and how do you create dialogue? And I think that's a major component of our EDD program, of which we are now going to start offering down
Right,
here.
and I would be remiss to not note that we just got authorized to start offering an EDD cohort here. So anybody knows anyone interested in an EDD program in leadership and management, talk to me. Okay, so
So this is just a little bit about us.
Yeah.
As Bruce was saying, the conversation started, and we're very excited about this because, as the logo says, we're committed to designing for the users and for the people that are using our facilities. And I think in K-12, how we've characterized what we're doing is we're trying to create the high-performance learning environment. And so I think the opportunity for us is to take that idea and that commitment and engage, sort of many voices in defining what that truly means, because I think a lot of people say this, and we've even asked ourselves, what does that really mean, and how do you prove that you're actually creating, high performance? So, so the opportunity again in the serendipitous interaction with Bruce through one of our other projects, has already, sort of initiated that conversation. But again, we're excited to have all the many viewpoints here, to help us figure out exactly what the proof of the thesis is.
Yeah, great. So today's agenda is going to quickly shift over to Sean, who I will give this to in a minute, who's going to be talking about some work that Perkins Eastman has done around pre- and post-occupancy evaluation. And then some of our other Perkins Eastman colleagues will lead a conversation about how the built environment impacts education. Then we'll get into a conversation about what educational outcomes should we be targeting, and then how can districts use this now. And at the end of the day, we'd like to wrap up. We have some thoughts about where we would like this to go, but we really want to see how this develops, and then think about collectively what would make sense in terms of some next steps. And then the last piece is, for those who can stick around, we invite folks to come up to our wonderful roof deck for just some refreshments and selfies. People take selfies out the wazoo up on that roof deck. It's a great view. So we'd love for you to stick around. And then around noon, we'll have lunch, and we'll go out and get it, and then come back in and sort of eat and talk at the same time. All right?
Thanks.
All right.
So the goal today is that this is a workshop where we're asking questions, and we're hoping that you can help us think through those questions. That said, I couldn't help myself, and I've got some slides. And as my colleagues will attest, I always show too many slides, so I'll go relatively quickly through this. But as the practice area leader for the firm, this idea of high-performance learning environments is something near and dear to my heart, and one of the questions I've asked myself is, are we practicing it in a way that truly is realizing, that ambition of creating a high-performance learning environment? And so, my goal, and this whole first section in many ways is actually, this is not a proposal of how we should be working, it's actually a question of how we should be working. And in some ways it started with a few questions going forward. Just looking at some simple data, $90 billion spent in 1 year on educational facilities design. And so, what are we getting for that? What's the value of that investment in some ways, other than simply new and perhaps aesthetically pleasing buildings? Right around the same time when we were trying to work through these conversations, there was an administrative change here in DC. And don't take my anecdotes in the wrong light here, but this is a building that we had opened in 2014. It's the highest scoring new school in the world, according to the Lead for Schools platform. And some people, when that had opened, that were in certain positions of power, said, well, should we be spending our money on that kind of thing? And that wasn't the goal of the design in the first place. The design aspirations, again, were high-performance learning environment, and ultimately the efforts to achieve that goal realized a high credit score on the LEED system, and it ended up with that sort of status and captured a certain amount of tension there. But the real, I think, impact, once we started saying, well, yes, we think there's value in that, and we think it's getting to this idea of a better educational environment. And we started looking at certain metrics. So we surveyed the staff, we started digging into some certain performance metrics. So here's one, the highest test score gains of any high school in the city once they had moved back into it. But the challenge for us then is, to start to try and connect that to this and that to this. And I think in many ways that's what we're after today, is to start the conversation and continue the conversation about that, because I happened to be listening to the radio one Sunday morning, and Freakonomics came on, which is always an interesting program. And so this quote came up where the British government said, hey, we're doing all this stuff and we don't actually know if it works. So why don't we hire a bunch of smart people and start studying these things? So they created it's a nice name too, the Behavioral Insights Team. So this was the challenge again to us of, we're talking about high performance, we're spending $120 million on a brand new high school. How do we connect those two pieces? So again, that was the question for us, but what is the impact, and how do we even define what impact is? There's impact on students and their future and their health and their performance. There's teachers, there's community members, there's a lot of different scales of what we're talking about here as well. And where do we place our emphasis as we go forward? Because even if you think about how to characterize all the many disparate things that create a great high-performance learning environment, there's a lot of different lenses that you can use from, how children are learning or how they should be learning, and all the developmental issues that we know about that, how people are teaching in the pedagogy. But then we've got community influences, and we're certainly have community context in this idea of sustainability. How does that change the way we do things? And because we practice around the world, in particular, we see this even culture being a varying factor. But every school that I've worked with in DC has a different culture as well. So it's a very powerful idea. And then one of the other things that the market in many ways is dealing with right now is this ambition to design net zero energy schools, which is an admirable goal. For those of you that don't know what net zero means, it means simply that a building produces as much energy as it consumes. And the interesting thing about that process of designing a building like that is that at the end of the year, you can actually lay your utility bills out and prove it, right? Did we do it or not? And so, but a lot of energy is going into that in the school design market, but that's not our school client's core mission, right? And if you wanted to have zero energy, you just don't build the building. But that doesn't achieve the mission or the vision, right? So the question was, should it actually be net positive education as the output? We can certainly do net zero and other things within that context, but how do you actually have a rigorous process that gets to that goal, but in addition perhaps to some of the other ambitions of energy conservation and other things that are subsets of the larger goal. So what we wanted to do today is talk about some of the steps that we've taken to try and to get towards that goal, and in many ways that's like the holy grail, right? Can we ever get there? I hope so, but that's the conversation today. But what we've started to do is to commit to a research agenda within the practice, and I think the real exciting opportunity again is now to broaden the base of what we've started to do over the past few years, with our Drexel colleagues and all of you around the table. But it's started with post-occupancy evaluations, first of a Washington Latin Charter School here, then Dunbar that I just showed you, and what I'll show you is a case study of number 3, because we started here and then we're iterating through this and trying to get better and better as we go. So it's not a done process, it's in many ways a fledgling process. But again, the springboard for the conversation in many ways is the study that we sent you a link to here called Measuring Up. This is the white paper that resulted in that. And I'm going to go quickly through it, but all the Perkins Eastman folks that are in the room are the team that developed this white paper, so that's why we're all here. And we all have different perspectives on this. But this is the springboard in many ways of how we've started the conversation, and the question for the rest of the day in many ways is where do we go from here? But just to introduce the school, this is the Martin Luther King School. It's actually 3 schools in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And when we were hired to do the project, again, it was pursuing net zero energy, but the superintendent also had a dual challenge here to the mayor's net zero desires. The innovation agenda was the restructuring of the district, again, to get to those educational outcomes that the superintendent was trying to do. So he restructured the grade level configurations, and there's 3 co-located schools here, so a lot of ambition about after-school programming and other things, again, to make sure that the children had a whole host of opportunities available to them as need be to achieve this environment. These were the swing buildings that they came out of, and not the original building that the schools were housed in, but actually that building was perhaps worse than these ones. But what we had the opportunity to do in many ways is realize that we could study how these buildings were supporting education, and then we could study how the new building was.
How long were they in swing?
They were in swing for 2.5 years.
So the idea, again, is that we've got multiple schools. We've got about 740 students in there. We've got a school that has, a very ambitious community agenda as well. It's open in multiple hours, so, it's trying to be a center of community as well. But again, we're after this idea of high performance here and all the varied things that might mean. But again, it's also, again, a community facility, so it's a real emphasis in pulling the community into the building, after hours, on weekends as well. But also the idea that it's a learning community that it's trying to foster too. So a professional community within that learning community. And this is just a diagram of teacher workrooms and things that might attract people to teacher workrooms, like good coffee and great printers and places to congregate. But we even saw the net zero piece come together with the educational ambition that we're trying to get all the plug loads out of the classrooms and into a centralized place. So again, education and the net zero goal, we're reinforcing each other very evidently there. But the question that we posed was, if we put these two things together, something that is sustainable, high performance, and the innovation agenda, do we achieve those high performance learning environments? So do they get to the educational outcomes that we think represent high performance ultimately as our goals? And does it build this sense of community, that we think is so important within the learning environment as well? Again, both within the school, within the professional staff, but also the larger context of community and context that the school resides within as well. So we opted, because there are so many great and varied aspects of this question, to study really two pieces of the puzzle of high performance. So one is to focus on this idea of indoor environmental quality, and we'll talk about how we've done this from sort of two different vantage points, but then also to again tackle this idea of community and how we build learning community in there. So there are a lot of disparate parts to each of these, and we can talk about them again, and we've got all the experts around the table on some of these metrics, and we'll dig in deeper. But what we had as inputs in many ways are certain things that were directly focused from the design on trying to achieve some of these goals. So indoor environmental quality, daylight, acoustics, thermal comfort, indoor air quality were all aspects of the design to try and leverage those architectural opportunities to get to the educational goals that we were hoping to discover that we were supporting. And then the community aspect as well, everything from the community having its own entrance into a portion of the building for after hours, to again the teacher workrooms, to the scale of the sort of neighborhoods within the buildings, lots of different aspects again of how the building was trying to foster this idea and enhance this idea of creating a great community asset, on all different scales. And here's how we did that. So we put together again, a multidisciplinary team, many of whom are around the table. Some of us, sort of on the design side, some in the sustainability expertise. Emily as a design researcher, but I think we all believe we're researchers at heart. And then the school administration engaged as well, and particularly supporting the idea. But we'll talk about how that goes as far. So there was the opportunity again to think about before they got into the new building and study that aspect in the pre-occupancy, and then continue the study. And we still have the opportunity to continue to see how the building's performing as we go. Now that they've been in there for a period of time. And our methodology was, a literature review, a survey that was done through SurveyMonkey online, particularly focusing on the teachers in this particular instance in all the schools. So again, we've got sort of what you would consider a primary school and a middle school, they call them lower and upper, but also an early childhood program in there as well. But as you can see, Heather, here in the environment too, we focused again on quantitative analyses of the actual performance of the learning environment as well. So we didn't bring a toolkit, right? But we've got all these great, crazy tools, that to measure the performance of the environment, and so we did that in both settings, pre and post as well. But in some ways, this last bullet is the missing third leg of the stool for us in some ways, and those from districts here might be able to help us think about how to do this in some ways, is the indicators of educational performance that districts capture. In some ways that's hard for us to get to historically, but we're starting to collect it, and the question in some ways is what's the most meaningful output that we can get to through those indicators as we go. So the literature review focused on those issues that we've talked about. And the survey, again, online, we tried to use the same survey. We varied it very slightly just for pre and post, so that one we could ask if you had been in the prior building, for example, and on the post. But there was also an evolving student-focused version, where we asked things that faculty are interested versus students on varied, and we're also starting to think about the age of children, because we want everybody engaged, but at some point the high schooler is going to have a different level of interest than somebody who's a fourth and fifth grader. And the survey asked about a lot of different things. At first, we asked about far too many things. And we realized that by the end, people are just exhausted and they stopped answering because, so we tried to narrow the focus. But thinking about the organization of the building, what do you think of the conditions? But also to try and get to softer things like, is this place, does it make you feel proud to come to this building? Or does it build that sense of community? But to get the things that, particularly after yesterday again, safety and security becomes at the forefront for a lot of things. But, or is it supporting teaching and learning, then indoor air quality aspects or environmental quality aspects as well. So the questions about community, again, we've got lots of scale issues here, and who, teacher to teacher, teacher to student, student to student, student to parent, student faculty to parent, neighbor. There's just a lot of permutations, of who and what comprises community and at what scale that we're trying to get to. So part of the reason I'm talking about these are the challenges that we're thinking about as well. But again, the on-site testing that we've done in the environment on the performance range from daylight, visual comfort, noise, of course thermal comfort, air quality issues as well. All in again with this goal of creating what we consider high performance in many ways. And so this is the IQ aspects of high performance, but then we can think about space and furniture and color and all sorts of other issues, adjacencies that start to embellish that. So to quickly just run through our findings, one is that both from the survey side and from the sort of metered side, the light is better. Some of this is a result of the net zero process, which focuses a lot on natural light in the environment. So again, sustainability and high performance, coming together very beautifully in some ways to create what I think are some of the nicest classrooms we've ever seen.
Sean, remind us again when this was done after the occupancy of the new school.
The metrics were taken in April, the school was occupied in the end of December.
Yes.
So it was just
Very
a few months
soon,
after.
very soon, yeah.
The survey was done in a different,
Well,
slightly different time.
yeah, I mean, the timeline is actually in the document, so you
Yeah.
can look at it. I mean, we've talked about this when we presented it before, that the timeline is not ideal towards, best practices for post-occupancy evaluation, but we were constrained by the school schedule, the end of the school year, holidays, various factors, and for us, we felt it was more important to get in there and get some data that we can then build upon, because we can always go back a year later, 5 years later, and reevaluate things and see how things are changing. But we wanted that snapshot post-occupancy, and the school was like, okay, this is the week, and we were like, okay, let's do it. So
We actually did do a survey then again a year after that.
Right,
We
last year
did,
we
we
did
did
something,
one this last spring as well, so they'd been in a year and 3 months at that stage.
Yeah.
But I think the realities of all that is I think, again, another lens that we should be thinking about, that, working in schools and doing, sort of active research, there are compromises that we make, as we try to tease out these issues.
And to Sean's point earlier about it being an iterative process for us, is that we're really trying to figure out where we should be focusing on and what kinds of metrics we should be evaluating, what kind of access we need, so that as we evolve this, we're not only evolving our tools and our process and our questions, but really figuring out, okay, maybe we need to be approaching a school 6 months ahead of time instead of 3 months ahead of time, or, working through these things and really identifying what would be a best practice for doing this, but upholding the rigor and the value of the effort.
So, I'll just go quickly through this, but again, thermal comfort, the building's performing as we would hope within the range, right? Whereas the older buildings were not, at least a good portion of the time. The acoustics are better, and the interesting thing is when we shared this with our client to some extent, his reaction was, 57%. Everybody tells me they love this place, and that they want to be in there. And I think he said, I can't remember exactly, but all the other facilities in town wanted to be performing there. So he was surprised by some of the metrics. Again, but that's the real nice thing about the survey tool that we have, is that we're getting sort of qualitative responses to the environment. And some people just don't react to some of these things or notice them until you ask, perhaps. But we're also measuring it to see whether or not it's performing at the same time, so we can compare their perception relative towards the actual performance of the environment too. So air quality, and starting to tease out, again, ideas of community, again, so 57%, so this is a faculty and student relationship, more people than the prior facilities. 42% faculty and staff, enhancing community across that. And again, there were very purposeful strategies, the teacher workroom that you see here, to try and foster some of those relationships and design. 48% more amongst the students relative towards the prior buildings. And these data points are not so important, but I think one opportunity that we have is to say, Cambridge can now take this and they're designing the next building and the next building and the next building. And I think, how do we start to think about, the experience of this district relative to other districts that are trying to do these things, and capture the insights coming out of this kind of research to make good decisions as we go forward. So 100% proud to work in this building. So again, getting to those kinds of intangible, responses, to the architecture of the place, and when you start to think about teacher retention as maybe the next step of an indicator, if you're happy with the building and this is a better place to spend your day, then perhaps again one of the most valuable assets in sort of the educational process is enhanced perhaps by
Can I ask a question about that? So do you guys have a good sense of what research is out there about the connection between those types of metrics and educational outcomes? Like, do we know anything about whether having faculty feel good about their school and be proud of it has any connection to educational outcomes, or is this a question we should be asking in this meeting? Like, what kind of foundation exists for that connection?
That's what the meeting's about. So that's the perfect question for this, right?
Yeah, and I think as part of this white paper, we're looking into that, like doing kind of a lit review to see, especially for the community aspects of these questions that we're asking, is there a tie? Has anyone else researched this? And we found a surprising lack of information around that.
I've never seen stuff about
exactly.
that.
So I think that's what we're trying to hopefully get at in this meeting.
Yeah, and why we're so excited about, again, the Drexel relationship now is, and we've spoken with Tommy about some of these issues too, is here's an opportunity to build a platform that can start to get to those answers, hopefully. So I think what we'd like to think about collectively today is, what do we really want to know? And out of these kinds of conversations, and how do we prioritize those questions too, so we can get to sort of the big questions first, in some ways.
I think that's the perfect segue.
Yeah. So and then you laid down this question, right?
Enough slides there.
So that's it. There's today's goal.
No, go back, just go back to your last one, because that's actually a really important one, which is the indicators. Because in a sense, that is the grail, the indicators that link to something meaningful.
Yeah, and we're purposely using indicators, so that these are indicators of, again, educational outcomes, right? They're not the educational outcomes, but what tools do we have and resources available to us as a district? And a lot of this stuff is reported by every school, perhaps. And so how do we leverage, data that exists? One other question to that too. So with that, Emily.
All right, so just a little more PowerPoint, and then we'll start engaging with each other. Get out of front of that screen. So really the rest of the morning, as Heather's pulling up stuff, we're going to focus on this impact piece. And so we'll have a chance to really think about outcomes. Later we're going to think about strategies, things of that nature. But first we're just going to kick off the morning thinking about impact. Go ahead and thank you. Sean kind of alluded to this, but we also want to think about impact on different scales. So there can be impacts on the individual, there can be impacts at the level of the school and at the level of the community. Sometimes obviously one thing that would affect the individual would trickle up and vice versa, trickling down. So to give an example, just to kind of, again, this part of the presentation is just to kind of help us get in the right mindset for a brainstorm. So if we introduce more daylight into a building, at an individual level, that might affect our circadian rhythms. At the school level, we might be turning off our electric lights, so we have less energy consumption. And that at a community level, we would then be drawing less resources on the drawing less natural resources and impacting the greater ecology.
So the other way we like to define types of impact is using the triple bottom line of sustainability, so looking at things from a social, environmental, and economic realm of thinking. So we're really looking to get at the intersection of all of these things. So some example of social impacts could be health, well-being, community, and equity. For economic, we're looking at things like construction costs, operating costs, and HR costs. And then for environmental, it's things like resources, climate, and habitat.
Okay, so what we're going to set up a framework for is today's conversation. So what can we impact and how? And we've kind of set up a framework for how we see impact happening. So there's strategies that we can take either at a design level or a school policy level. There's strategies that we can take that lead to an impact of some sort on the student, on the teacher, on the community, on all of these scales that we're discussing. And then hopefully that impact leads to a positive or a negative outcome. So for the morning portion of the session, what we're going to be focusing on is the impact, but just setting that up a little more, I'll give you an idea of what we're talking about. In a strategy category, we might consider adding light shelves to improve daylight within the space of our southern facing classrooms.
Now, the impact of that might be an increased awakeness throughout the day and ability to concentrate due to the response to the circadian rhythm that Emily was discussing. And then the outcome of that is hopefully higher knowledge retention, improved test scores. So this is kind of the discussion that we're having. Oh gosh, do we have a power source?
The others are plugged in there.
It looks like it's plugged in.
Might not be connected to.
I'm just gonna go really fast.
No, this is plugged in.
Looks like,
Is the connection loose on the back?
Here, I got another plug over here.
I'm just trying to figure out if this power strip is on, but it doesn't light up, so I can't tell. I haven't turned it on.
So it's probably not on.
This is a test.
Yes.
All right, we'll keep going.
I'll just keep going if it dies. I'm gonna go really fast. Okay, so only like 4 more slides. So, like I said, in the morning part, we're gonna kind of skip the strategy part right now. We're not gonna talk about the specific design strategies or the policy that will get us there. That's gonna be a later conversation. What we wanna focus on now is what impacts can the built environment have and can policy have on education. For the afternoon, then we'll move into the outcomes and we'll try to start to tie those together like we were discussing.
So, to start bringing this conversation together, we were brainstorming the different areas of impact. We've come up with what we're calling buckets, 5 different areas that this possibly could evolve into. So there's behaviors, health and well-being, socio-emotional well-being. We have one's culture, personality, personal history, and building function and performance. We totally recognize that there's gray boundaries between these. There's probably overlap. Like one thing that could be an area of impact and behavior may affect your well-being. But this is just a starting point. Also, we expect maybe the naming of this, or we might want to add a 6th category. So we can do that, but let's just start down this path. So we're going to give you a couple examples within each to again get everyone in the right mindset, and then we're going to start building upon them. So let's think about behavior. So go ahead and give me my first. So we have color. Color in the space may affect our behavior, right? We might be invigorated by reds and yellows, or we might kind of be calmed by our greens and blue spectrum. So is color adding to our overstimulation? Maybe overstimulation might be an impact that we're receiving from the environment. Also, the way we have visibility within a space, there's been shown reduced instances of bullying with visible connections to spaces. So if we, a strategy being opening up a space, but an impact would be incidences of bullying.
Looking at health and well-being, we're looking at things like active design strategies, so stairs that look nice and you want to take as opposed to creepy dark stairs in the corner. Things that help promote drinking water and healthy eating, so adding more water fountains and that sort of thing. And then looking at how the building actually affects our health, things like sick building syndrome.
So socio-emotional well-being, so beyond feeling happy, beyond pride, but thinking about sense of community, thinking about opportunities for privacy and interaction, so trying to balance that. Getting into culture, accommodating different learning styles, so Gardner's multiple intelligences. How are we going to have an environment that's supporting someone who's maybe a verbal learner versus a kinesthetic learner? Accommodating people who maybe are introverts versus extroverts, and how the environment would support them through their day-to-day and their learning styles. And then also, again, thinking specifically about culture, cultural inclusivity, cultural sensitivity, understanding that one's cultural background or personal history may affect how they perceive color, or how they even learn, or the expectations of learning styles.
Okay, the last bucket that we have is building function and performance. So there's how we shape the building, both indoors and out, can have a big impact on whether it becomes an active community center, whether it's able to be used as such, and so consequently has an impact on the students and the community at large. This is a project where we intentionally, this is actually the MLK project, we intentionally separated community or more public functions so that it was able to be a distinction between the classroom environments and the community functions, and could be occupied safely throughout the evening hours. And even considering how this works in the outdoors, so making sure that there is access to some of the community functions. The community can come into the space surrounding the school and even into the school to create that environment. And finally, beyond kind of how the building is shaped and function, once we get into the indoors, the indoor environmental quality, all these factors come together to create a space, hopefully, that can support learning, or it can impede it in some circumstances. So making sure that how the building is functioning and performing can improve daylight, thermal comfort, acoustics of the space, and ultimately the air quality. There's a lot of research in this particular category that we've kind of written into the white paper around tying each of these individual specific factors to improvements in student test scores or reduced sick leave of teachers. So there's a lot of interesting body of research tying each of these individual parameters, but I think looking at it more holistically in terms of a high performance environment and the ultimate impacts of that to education is what we're interested in.
Before you move on, just we kind of brought function and performance together because we know that it's also beyond just the design environment, but also policy and administration and the operations of the building. And if you have facilities managers who are constantly tweaking this thing because it's not working, or there's resources going towards this improvement or just the functioning of the building, how that draws away from other potential use of that resource. So that it's beyond just kind of being green. It's like how do you just operate the school. Okay, so now we can all shake off, and that's it for PowerPoints for a while. We have about an hour. We want to start brainstorming. What we want to start doing, and we're going to start bringing some paper on the walls. We've got Post-its, we've got pens. What we're going to do is we want to start building out these categories. So we've given you, through this PowerPoint, a couple of examples of the impacts under these buckets, but collectively, we want to start talking about the things that you think potentially are really important impacts, or maybe not really important, but important impacts. So we just want to start generating things. We're going to think about it at the scale of the individual, school, and community, if that helps you frame it. We want to think about the behavioral, health and well-being, socio-emotional, cultural, and function and performance aspects. We're going to go through these together, kind of adding things. We invite you to write things on the Post-its. We can walk things up to the board for you. You're welcome to come up to the boards if you want. We're going to start to take a couple minutes, jot down some ideas. Yeah, do you want me to explain that?
I just need a little clarification.
Yeah.
Impact is a relational piece. So you're saying the impact of just the built environment, the design, the functioning of the environment? I mean,
yes. Yes, because they're all somewhat interrelated.
Right, but not, I mean, the thing, of course, that jumps out at you is there's so much else that is a function of teacher turnover and bullying and, I mean, that's the problem. You're trying to do a cause and effect, but you're wanting to look at one piece of that. And so I just want to understand what the piece is that you're wanting us to look at.
The lens is through the environment. That's kind of what I think the tie between...
Through the built
environment, though one would argue outside spaces.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So think about how the built environment can impact things, but again, it's probably beyond the built environment because it would impact pedagogy and support of teachers and how learning is happening, and so it can be very conceptual as well. We'll see where this goes.
So Emily, do you want us to name specific aspects of the built environment?
So we want to try and stay
As
away
you do in the
from
slides.
we want to try and stay away from strategies as so like the thing that would make the impact. We're trying to focus on kind of what could be impacted. Like, is it performance and how you would define that, or is it what kind of behaviors or what kinds of cultural things we need to consider, from your realm and your role. The things that perhaps are of interest to you can go up on the board first, and then we'll see how they're interrelated.
Yeah, can I give it, because like when you said, you showed behavior, but you said color,
Yeah.
Keller was more of a strategy. So like what I'm thinking is a new one, like behavior for me is like sexual predator and like that's a thing, so that's a behavior that we have to deal with in the built environment. So would that be an example that you said
Write it
bullying,
down. Get
but
it
I
down.
will have to deal with how do we avoid sexual predatory behavior from staff?
Yeah.
So is that a good example of?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and like,
Does that help?
That we're trying to avoid that behavior in the built environment. Because that didn't
How do
come,
we
because you
impact-
showed color, and color for me was the strategy.
Right, I guess, yeah.
And that was what sort of
The impact
confusing,
was
but the
the-
impact was the bullying, and it was the behavior, you showed color, and that was what threw me off, was that's really the strategy. But then you took, right, but it was really the bullying, it was the impact.
Well,
Right.
well, it wasn't related to bullying, it was the walls that put you past
It
that.
affects your mood.
That was
That was
right,
the
right.
impact of the
So,
color.
so it's, I'm trying to avoid a behavior, right? So I just got a request to put a window in a room that was a storage room, because I want to use it as a practice room, because kids are going to be in there now. So I need to put a window in there now, because there's going to be kids in there with staff, and we need to make sure nothing naughty's happening.
Right, so the strategy is the window, but the impact would be,
Is
yeah.
behavior.
So we don't even need to know what the strategy is.
Exactly.
It's just your priority.
Yeah, and inevitably, we're gonna be thinking of strategies,
We're
so
just
as we think of them, that's fine, we're gonna keep a list, but that's what we're trying to get to in the next conversation.
Right. And whatever the process is in your mind that gets to that middle thing, so it's hard to see, but we have the
Give it a
three,
look.
yeah, I can. Oh, there we go. So, if it's easier for you to think about a strategy and what the impact is, or if it's easier for you to think of the outcome you would measure and work backwards, that's fine too. It really depends on your thinking style and where you're coming from.
So which one are you? Behavior.
So as they go up, talk, sound them, like say them, so that we can kind of build off of each other.
Well, it's also, it's individual.
And then
Read John's.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Read John's?
Yeah, read it.
Okay, so your behavior was, or your in John's.
Can't be anonymous here.
One-way communication in the classroom, teacher to student. So that's a behavior.
Behavior.
Increased parent engagement. Where do we think it belongs?
Behavior.
What is this?
Increased parent
Is
engagement.
that a cultural or a behavior?
I see, I would think, is that just emotional? It can be both, that's the thing, we can put it up.
It can be a-
We can write it to
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's brainstorming.
Yes.
Don't
Yeah.
Don't
react.
think it.
Don't think.
So we can add some from the MLK studies, so we could do a sense of community, so that was something that we were focused on with that study.
Once we get
So we have reducing cultural identity, we have general academic expectations, sick days and absenteeism, Hey, as you put things out, if you can say what they are.
Happiness. Having growth mindset and socio-emotional. And cooperational learning, teacher and student, and behavior, those connect between individual and school.
Yeah, I don't know how you measure that.
Increased motivation.
Your plans, what's that's useful to your
I'm adding accommodating different learning styles, which is something you brought up.
I'm at a collaboration with local government and also local industry.
All those proposals stuff, I mean, it's really nice area.
I think that goes in here. Yeah.
You know.
And the learning style. Oh, we have that already.
That's okay, like it's not really your kind.
Put it up, doesn't matter. The aspect of Lisa brought up, to me, is really the bottom line, as I've struggled with this exercise.
Kids are motivated to learn,
This,
motivated to
this
teach.
part, what that means.
So I put that in
You know,
the
what is it that we define?
That was good you put it in. Yeah, well, I took it from an emotional standpoint.
And that's the thing, like these are, there's gonna be overlaps, there's gonna be gray areas.
School feels welcoming to children in the community.
But
Cognitive function.
this is one of my struggles with, because that's not.
I'm too hot to learn.
And it's going to take.
We can also create another category if we start thinking things.
Yeah, I get the building function.
Yeah, I think it's like what will define things comfort.
It'll take several years.
Her teachers, students, it's too hard. Teachers and students.
Well, or they turn on the air conditioning, it's too loud.
Put that one up.
From our perspective, work position, perhaps,
It's too hard to control in the same room.
Stronger community
In the same day.
partnerships.
Teachers complain about the same thing.
And redistrict.
Community support for the educational enterprise.
That is struggling to.
Well, I think there's impacts either way. So this is legislation impacts, whether they're positive or negative at the moment is a different.
Overtime data to spend. I
think that a lot of people,
It's a lot easier to take things that are tangible.
create a lot of
Curbing, I mean, there's a whole lot of different areas where accessibility is because of the value of people needing accessible roadways and access and reaches and all of those
Which all of us
things.
should be able to
Well,
participate in.
that's the thing, and you know, accessibility, this is my other area of research is senior living, and so we talk a lot about accessibility, and, you know, ADA was geared off of people coming back from the Vietnam War. It's for men who have upper body strength, and it's, you know, it's not for little frail old ladies who are shorter. You know, we talk about that in senior living, but if we talk about accessibility, we should be talking about universal design.
Yeah, universal design.
Yeah.
In schools, it's it's something that's not even
It's not even entertained.
considered.
Well, it's forced sometimes because of federal laws and stuff, so that's how it gets into school.
But
Yeah, but it's
How it
not
gets in, how it gets in.
not thought of holistically.
Not university.
Yeah, so,
Very.
so one sort of desired future, and you reminded me of it because I know you work with the aging group that I'm in, and we're all in, actually, is, I think to me, a desired future is seeing the schools in a far more comprehensive way integrate the needs of a wide spectrum of communities. So, for example, we have these kitchens in these schools, and we are moving more away from the sort of delivery packaged food to having full cook kitchens for the children there. But the community is aging, and why couldn't they also be feeding centers and places that there would be, you know, retired, you know, it's your Meals on Wheels. If you can get to your local school, you can have, you know, you can have dinner or lunch there with, even with the children. So what does it look like to far more fully integrate our various ages into these public places that are, you know, throughout our communities, so that one, they're more adaptable, as the children, you know, in a community might be aging up and out, and there's an older population still there, that place is far more adaptable to kind of meet the needs, or it might be the daycare part of it.
And it's supporting population health.
Right.
But John said shared vision, and the problem that I'm seeing with that in my program is, again, where the municipal the value that's being placed on certain types of services from a municipal standpoint, from a commercial or development standpoint, is not in line with the community, local, and the schools, and creating a shared vision and making that value the new reality, what it is our society is really trying to achieve in a jurisdiction, that moving to that is the
And there are ways to do that if we can get the groups together, because what you're doing is, if you come back here, because we're talking about the desired future, but in current reality, and you guys know this in class, we always do this, how do you surface one's assumptions? How do you get people to do it? There's a whole series of activities that you can do to get people to surface. I mean, we could literally get Trump voters in here and non-Trump voters in here, and guarantee you over time, you could get them talking together. Once the assumptions are, because what's important about the assumption is, from another person's point of view, is that, help me understand why you think that way. Because as you get to that level, and you build the trust within the space, people will talk. Because by and large, people do want to talk.
But that's what I want to say with this now, is that if we're trying to build a shared vision, we're building it right now. I mean, no pun intended on the build word, but we are literally building the shared vision based on what the experiences are. They're not going to be the same.
Right.
But a shared vision has to take into account all of those separate experiences. And I mean, that's the common point of what's going on. But until any one of us can say, yeah, this is what we all kind of say, that 15 of us, there is no shared vision. It's almost like the elevator pitch, unless you're able to actually state what it is. So we look at this, the strategies, impacts, outcomes. That's just the events of what the desired future really is in the current reality. Then we actually have the now and then conversations that we're doing now. That's these experiences, but also how we're putting this together and where we're going. But it's not a, oh yeah, we'll do this when we come back. We're not going to do this next. It's like right now. I mean, that's the only difference that
It's getting people
we're still pulling away.
to co-sense the possibility to then get to a co-creating point of view. Because a shared vision doesn't mean I agree with everything that's in that shared vision. It just means, hey, I can accept the parameters of it.
Well, and I mean, I know this was a lesson that took me a long time to learn, because in the District of Columbia around education reform, there was a whole group of people, we all said, oh, it's really messed up in the 80s. And we said, oh, we want it to be great, right?
Yeah.
We had all this agreement. And little did I understand at the time back in the 80s when I was engaged in it, as a parent in the system, it was like, oh, it really, made a difference why I thought it was messed up versus why somebody else thought it was messed up.
Yep.
And what it would look like, what great would look like. So the divergence on those of us who thought that real civic engagement and a kind of enfranchisement of low-income communities in Washington was what was going to fix it was, frankly, the losing side, and the winning side was the choice folks who said, oh, we can just kind of, as long as people have choices, then that's okay. So even as we get to a current reality and a desired future, why we think we have that current reality makes a huge difference, and sort of what our strategies are to get to that desired future will fundamentally, so that group of sort of Americans red and blue, we absolutely can agree on a current reality, I think, and even a desired future, but we will be all over the map on why and how
that's a
what it should
structural
look
issue,
like.
how to implement. And what's interesting about what you're saying is that, so we talk about choice. So let's go to what the neurosciences are starting to say, what pedagogy says, is that we believe that probably there's a thing called differentiated instruction, differentiated learning. Now, to me, that's a choice issue based upon how I process information. So the question I would have, in terms of schools, and I did this when I was superintendent to get to our schools to look at, why can't you have choice within the structure of the schools? Why not create environments that cater to that? Now, how that comes out, like in Philadelphia, it's magnet schools. Do you have magnet schools in DC?
Yeah.
But the problem with that is what? It's based on some type of lottery and entrance system, as opposed to just creating learning environments that any kid who is interested in any parent could go to. And what's wrong with that?
I mean, one of the things that the city of Cambridge has done, though, is they've sort of addressed that because they don't have neighborhood schools. Their entire system of elementary and middle schools are based on people selecting.
Where?
In city of Cambridge. Is selecting a school, and you put in your top 3 choices, and it's based on the pedagogy and the special programs that are in that school. Like, for instance, the MLK school, the elementary school portion of it is a Chinese immersion school. There's other ones that will, there's also a Spanish immersion school, but then every single one of the elementary schools, there's something about their program that may draw people. And then they literally, what it does is 2 things, that what you were talking about earlier about then planning, and you have then the haves and have-nots within the city. What this does is, because everybody's going everywhere, you don't then have neighborhood schools of the haves and have-nots. It means everybody tends to get mixed. Now, obviously, they have to put it in an incredible investment with transportation. But what they again do, though, is their routes have nothing to do with dropping a whole group of kids at one location. Their routes have to do with getting students around the city to their destination. And I do think it's an interesting model, especially because what they suffer from is there's a lot of kids in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, but because of it's so expensive to live in Cambridge, the minute that people have their 2nd child, they tend to move out. So then they have much fewer students in 3rd, 4th, and keep on going, and they're trying to rectify that through this innovation and changing the way that they've now have middle schools and that sort of thing, and get it more focused. But I don't know, I think it's an interesting way of flipping that whole idea of choice on its head and making it within the district.
And why do we have grade levels? Where'd that come from? Where'd grade levels come from?
The industrial system.
Yeah, Frederick Taylor. That's the way to do it. A principal, if you're a building principal, you're nothing more than the shop steward. I always get people going nuts. And I say, and if you're a teacher, you're nothing more than the worker on the floor. Because that's the model. That's the underlying assumption of these models. I mean, even John Dewey was bought into that model. So, yeah.
No, I'm saying going on the infrastructure, but you talk about this all the time, the flow of information, right? So you have the buildings, but then how is the information being, passed around, and and I think this is kind of what I was talking about by curriculum, is what does that look like? Why does it have to be aged by any means? So if you're going to structure a building in one way, why would you not then completely reinvent you can't keep the same curriculums in a building that is like a 25th century building. It doesn't make any sense, because you can't necessarily plan for it the way that it was. So if you start changing the one, kind of like you said, it's holistic, it's everything. So a 5th grader's not going, or a 5-year-old's not going to create their own curriculum, but if that curriculum doesn't necessarily exist, they are literally creating their curriculum based on where they gravitate. But that building has to facilitate, or it has to be reflective upon the ability to figure out, okay, they're all gravitating over here. Why? What's that?
That's Reggio.
Right. Yeah, Montessori.
Right, but I get tired of everybody trashing the industrial system, which has been amazing in terms of the level of universal education in this country.
But that's different.
And well, it's part of it because it enabled them to grow and accommodate in a relatively organized fashion enormous numbers of kids. So I think that it was an innovation, it was a process innovation, it was an organization innovation that was appropriate for the time
For the time. You just said that's
right. Exactly.
Yes.
And I think
that creating a new reality
I
is how do we get to the
I think that's right, but I don't think we've done that. I don't think on with the educators in the room, I don't think that on the educational side, on curriculum or instruction or I don't think there's been the innovation there that leads us to a model of design that's fundamentally different. So that's why they keep making them like that.
Now, just for 1 second, I want to use myself as a superintendent. And I think I told a couple of you this, my greatest, over 31 years in public education, my greatest accomplishment was when I had an entire elementary building in 2001 go to the school board and have their wall, asked the board to have all their walls knocked down between their classrooms. And the board, because I had a good board then, they bought into it. And they allowed it to happen. And we went to, but that raises another question. But what happened, but what's more important about it is, how did those teachers get to the point to do that? Because the teachers did it, not me. All I did was create the space for them to do it. And then the board bought into it because, from a leadership point of view, the question is, yeah, we did. I mean, it's like Frederick Taylor, he made us probably the greatest nation on the face of this planet because of the scientific method. It worked. But now look at industry, it's radically changing. It's changing, it's moving in a different direction. That's why, yes, it did. But you can't lose the underlying value set of universal education for all people, of which some people say, yeah, heck with that.
Well, Toffler, if you remember the Future Shock?
Yes.
That Toffler wrote, his term was mass customization,
Yes.
is where we were going to, and the car industry does this, right? You know, so there's not one, BMW that rolls off the line that's exactly like the others, right? And because you can say, hey, I want leather seats, or I want the better stereo, I want the convertible, so somehow industry is already doing this, right? Off of those models, but education is not yet.
So I'm going to move the, go ahead, last one around this.
Yeah, so Danny just said, because I've been tasked, we have 3 new high schools that are like in our capital plan, and they want new innovation. And I keep telling the educators, until you tell me you're going to do something different, right? And you keep staffing at like 1 to 25 or 1 to 28, and you're putting one child, one teacher with like 28 kids, that leads me to giving you little blocks of classes, right? So until you guys come and tell me you're going to do things and deliver your curriculum and your program differently, we can come and give you all these crazy ideas, but until you do it differently as educators and change the pedagogy.
And don't point at me.
No. You're sort of representing the board and the education.
Oh, right.
Most of the people here are designers and planners, right? So I keep telling them, when you come and tell me how you're going to change, then I can come to you as a planner and designer with all my architects, because I have a whole army of them.
Can I say
come in and
just
give you a
right
new
quick?
design.
The problem with that assumption, though, even within your administration, the way you approach it, is, and Sean will tell you, I mean, we know in commercial industry, you can't always ask the users how to design what it is that they're asking for. That has to come from a different place.
But that's not the question. That's the problem. That drives me nuts, because the question is not how should we design it. The question is what do you do? What do you do?
I would say that's what programming, exactly that. Because you can't ask it that way, but then also the administration has to be prepared to help. For instance, I have one person I hired who's a 21st century academics specialist, and all she does for every single school that we put a site-specific ed spec to, that's based upon not how they're doing it now, but how the school system wants them to teach, is then work with that school and help them develop their curriculum and train them according to the way that they are going to use the space.
That's how I got those teachers to do it, because for 2.5 years, I just flooded them with information and say, hey guys, I want you to look at this stuff, let's talk about it, but in the end, why don't you tell me what you want to do? And that's what they did.
And I would, if I may, I would like to tell you a little bit about the research I've done, because I was looking at schools in Finland, specifically in Helsinki. And Finland was really, they had a huge economic crisis in the early 90s because of the downfall of the Soviet Union and the breaking away of the Eastern Bloc. And they said, like, okay, what do we do? We're a small Nordic country. We don't have that much to offer. So the only way out of that is investing heavily into education. And at the same time, they said, well, like, what kind of students do we need to have to be internationally competitive? Ultimately, how do we get our kids to be able to compete? Not only the lucky few, but pretty much everybody on a high technology driven market, what are the things that everybody needs to have in order to be able to have a chance?
Until we nationally have that conversation and the leadership is saying, asking
but it
that
is
question.
obviously, it's a small country, so you can have that. But if you bear with me for a moment, what happened was when, like, at the same time there was a lot of like land flight into Helsinki, they had to build, like, in a very short period of time, like one school after the other after the other. And they said, like, okay, so instead of giving you, here's the program, we stick ultimately with the same old. It's like, okay, we use that program just as a framework, but before we start planning, we have a competition similar to architectural competition for teachers. Like, what's the concept of the school? What's the pedagogy? What's the culture you envision? And it was a competition, and the school board then decided, okay, so this actually seems to work not only for today, but for the future. And like, that person often became the principal. And I met principals, they were in their 30s. You would never see that in Germany, where I'm from, and very rarely here. But that then was the basis for an architectural competition, because like different learning, we need different spaces.
They allowed it to be
They
an
allowed
experiment.
to be an experiment and learn from the experiment, and then like that basis of that pedagogical competition created the brief for the architectural competition, where you've got a large amount of different architectural solutions for how the spaces could potentially support the teaching and the learning in there. And there was a very close-knit dialogue between all the stakeholders, mostly obviously administration, pedagogues, and architects, but also some of the community, to build the school. What can we do? And obviously finances were not that great, but there was the willingness to invest, but it was the process that then really slowly changed. And having then the experience with, okay, so this worked really well, and this actually facilitated this kind of learning suddenly, and we can be much more economic with the investments we have. They opened it to communities. I mean, schools really became community centers, but what does that mean to make a school work? How do we organize the spaces so that we can open up certain parts but keep it safe? What are things we need to integrate? For example, sports fields. The schools were located next to the next public like sports fields and so on. It was a shared facility. But it was really interesting then to see over a course of a decade how, like, from one project what worked here and so on, the sharing also. When the next school within the country was like, they would bring the stakeholders down and would do a tour of all kind of different things. So what do you envision? How do you want to teach? What's the culture of the school going to be? And that, I thought, was a really interesting process. Because we have so many other burdens and restrictions, often don't get to, that we can really sort of like, okay, you teachers, what do you want to do? How do you envision? What do our students need to learn in order to be able to survive a world, or in a world, to adapt to all the things we don't know, we can barely anticipate. And then we can have that dialogue and like, okay, so what do we think are the spaces we can provide? And how can it be adaptable enough so that we're not talking about we're building a school for 20 years? Because quite frankly, building a school for 20 years is BS. We don't have the money to rebuild it. It needs to be a school built for 50, 70, 100 years. And some of our best schools, the buildings are old buildings, but they work, they are adaptable enough, they allow enough things that we can go back in and change things to adapt them.
Cool.
So we've got about 15 minutes.
Yeah, I want to go to the next slide to end this thing. So just one thing real quick. One mantra I want you always to think about walking away from here is that structure shapes the behavior of people over time. That's, you got to buy into that, because that's how we're going to find out how to get to this.
Yeah, well, that's our thesis, right? So we're trying to find, what structures shape what behaviors, right? So, I know, John, you've got another slide.
Well, but I'm just going to put that up there, and that's what we're going to send out and get people to
I
look
think
at this.
what we should start thinking about now is the conversation's been amazing, right? And thank you all for coming here and sharing. As this idea, came together through a conversation over lunch one day, we're hoping that we can get some traction here, such that perhaps a mutual collaboration is an opportunity to continue the conversation. Certainly the Drexel PE piece will go forward, but we're hoping that some of you in the room will consider regrouping again at some point. But I think what I'd like to get towards is where do we go from here, right? As we walk out the door, what do we do next? So guidance from the folks at the table. But I also think there's real opportunities here. I mean, we've talked about taking this to Philadelphia in the spring, and in some way, shape, or form, because Philadelphia is now starting a modernization program. So thinking about the brain trust we have in the room here, that we have DCPS, who is 15 years into a modernization program, Baltimore, who is 2 or 3 or something like that, right? So maybe
2 or 3
adult
years
in your modernization program, right? So there's probably a lot of lessons that could be drawn from DCPS's experience, certainly, then Baltimore's experience, but then Philadelphia, who's an emergent entity in this idea, and how do they learn from everything that we've learned in these other districts is a real opportunity for us, I think, as well. So, thoughts about what do we do now?
Would people be open to reconvening this conversation with this group, say in January sometime?
Yeah, I'd be open to that. In fact, I think that would be really helpful because a lot of this information has just been kind of thrown, and I feel like I've been a little quiet and I need some time to process it. So
Well, but also, even, this is related to DC, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go out after I make this comment, but I definitely want to stay involved, is DC has done so much.
Yeah.
And it is not documented, it is not evaluated, it is not assessed.
Yeah, can you do a post-occupancy on 10 years of schools?
Well, you should, but also, I mean, I have been one who thinks that you could argue that the modest improvement in test scores could all be attributed to the nearly $4 billion worth of building investment.
Right now, we can't.
But
we aren't sure.
we can't, no, yeah, we really don't know, and believe me, you'd be in a lot of trouble if you said that. I get to say it, but you can't. And so, because, there's a lot of folks that would say, no, it was the, Michelle Rhee and Kaya Henderson, and, so, but I think that we have to do a better job where work has been done. And particularly where we're serving low-income communities and children from low-wealth families, where we can look at it, and we haven't done it. And so...
do what Helsinki did.
Yeah.
Bring them in. Rest loads.
Yeah.
Wherever there's a similar project, share the experience.
But I'll say one thing about that. Yes, we have to definitely try to reflect our successes, get all the success stories out there. The thing that we'll always all be judged by, though, is how many dollars per pupil and how many dollars per square foot, and the uneven measurement from jurisdiction to jurisdiction that the public is forced to have to compare by. You have to really be careful of that.
No, and I think that's right, because
Judgment comes, the perception comes when we have people with different agendas putting information out.
No, and I think that's, I take your point, and I think it's right, and I think that, but this is where looking at it not just from a dollar perspective,
Yeah, I
but
think
what did
that's-
you get?
Yeah, exactly, and I think just trying to stay as data-driven as
Yeah,
possible.
right.
And using the numbers to your
Yeah,
advantage. And I
yeah.
think that's something that DCPS is actually striving to be better about in the future.
Yeah.
But you gotta get the assumptions from all the different groups on the table. And I'm telling you, when you do that, all of a sudden, you create the space. What happens is, you begin to develop a sense that, I didn't understand that you were coming from that point of view. I'm telling you, it will happen if it's done right.
I think that's a good next step.
Yeah.
If you are going to reconvene, is to really think about, after all this, what assumptions can you actually put down on paper and say, this is my agenda, this is where this is coming from, this is the experience and the models that have led up to this, and where I think this should go. Just be able to, if you can best articulate that by yourself, it'll change as soon as you say it out loud. But especially in the case, but I think be able to try and do that is definitely a month of homework.
in thinking about next steps, when this group gets back together, because I hope we do, it's a fascinating group of people, I would like to get a better sense among ourselves about the objective of this conversation. There's a lot of different ways we could go. When I hear words like shared vision, it makes me think of processes that we lead all the time toward advocacy and communications kind of campaigns, and I don't think that's where we intended to go necessarily, so I'd like to get a better sense, and it's probably something that just the leaders of this effort need to decide. Like, what is the objective of getting this group together? And if it is to guide future research, then that leads us to one type of conversation. If it is to inspire a communications or advocacy campaign, that leads us totally in a different direction. So that I would like to figure that out before we get together.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, we definitely can do that, but that is partly, I mean, we have like, 2 minutes to do it now, but that's kind of what we want to hear to some extent from you all too, right? Because that drives it. So from your perspective, gathering everything you've heard today, and I'm not saying you have to answer this right now, but what would be, okay,
sure,
good, and what would be the objective that would make the most sense to be supportive of where you're trying to go? And so collectively, if we can hear that from people either today or email or whatever, that would be useful as we think about it too. I mean, I think we're up for sort of helping to guide or shape or lead or whatever it is, but definitely getting the practitioner and other academics and everybody's input is key.
And that's what that first column is all about. What's the gaps, what's the challenges that we have to identify to get to where you want to go too? Because the last part then is, okay, so where are the indicators?
And that's what I meant by assumptions. It's like literally what, because there's 25 different thoughts as to what this is right now. But until we're able to actually, you put down, it could go this way, it could go this way, you may come in with, hey, look, here are my 3 different possible ways. That is most beneficial. It is. And it's hard to do. I mean, it's very hard to do.
Well, we're 3 hours into it. That's number one, right? That's a good start. But Debbie?
Because I've heard different things, and we all are coming from different perspectives. You said something about helping Philadelphia. That's one goal, perhaps. We have 3 school districts with 3 different experiences on modernizations. When we talk about trying to track what school districts have done, we talked about like test scores, right? Test scores versus performance, 2 very different things. We're just talking about data. We're talking about like outcomes in terms of, new schools versus old schools. Like for me, knowing where we're going right now in Maryland and locally, just talking about new buildings, I would love to be able to talk about outcomes and how you can take what's good into an existing building as well, and not just talk about new buildings or just modernizations, because this has been very interesting and my head is spinning as well, because I know that we're in a direction where we're going to be doing a wide range of work probably in our school district of full tear down modernizations and probably renovations in existing buildings, which is sort of probably a new type of project that we're kind of approaching that we haven't been doing as much of. And how do we approach an existing building, and how can we sort of get the best bang for our buck in that kind of building, so teachers and students are feeling like they can still walk into an existing building, and like you said, Sean, that it still feels like a really wonderful project, even though it's no longer that tear down new building, because we call them WebEx projects now, but the modernization where now that old building was transformed into a new building, but even though it's an older building, still feels really wonderful and is getting a lot of these wonderful new outcomes. And so for me, and I think a lot of school districts could benefit from that, because you can't always take, it's like, how can you stretch that dollar as far as you can, so you can impact as many schools as you can. So that would, I think, would help a lot of school districts.
Another possible goal, which I don't know if it is of this group, again, do we have any desire to affect a national agenda?
Yes.
Or are we looking to customize and localize and look at smaller areas, or do we have again, some thoughts of affecting a national agenda.
Yeah,
It seems to me that that's also a possible
And
outcome.
what you're saying is we're gonna create all these hubs all over the place, but the important thing about these hubs is to connect them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I
That's the
think
key.
that's the point, right? I mean, there's a lot of knowledge right here, but, you know, a lot of it, going back to the silos, you know, again, a lot of what we've learned in DC is here, it's stuck in DC, you know, it's not getting out, you know, on that platform. But, you know, we've also talked about a lot of themes, you know, that are common, right? That the lack of resources is common to probably every district in the country, as we're talking about. And, you know, in many ways, that was the genesis of the conversation was, if you've got limited funds, how do you make a good decision to say, this is the best investment that I can make with what I've got, right? And, you know, and that was, in many ways, the start of the conversation.
Like, we're in a district that has half the amount of money that you do. No matter the fuck out.
To the national agenda question, because, I mean, there's a couple of pieces of legislation out there from the House and Senate. There's Representative Scott from Virginia introduced a bill, I think it's called the Rebuild America Schools Act, and in the Senate, Senators Reid and Brown introduced a bill that was the School Modernization Act. I mean, these folks who live in DC and work in DC know that this stuff rarely moves, particularly with the climate we have. So the work is in the states, the work is in the localities, in terms of having these types of conversations.
But
I guess
are these conversations, have you heard this kind of conversation in a whole bunch of different areas across the country? Or
Oh, no, I'm saying that has to happen. I'm saying that
because
has to
that goes to, I don't know if you guys are ready to get on the circuit or not, but getting to
Right.
some of these national conventions and having, you know, taking the you know, plum stuff out of this conversation and putting it before the, you know, National Association of School Administrators, which is in Alexandria, or, you know, getting onto, you know, and getting it to become a conversation. It's going to take quite a few years, but through the research that we've done in Baltimore City to look at school districts around the country, everyone's trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
But what we talk about here, a lot of the things we talk about here are not being discussed.
Right.
You know, so letting that filter to the top and coming up with how do you connect educational outcomes with the modernization that everyone needs in the infrastructure is asking the question. We were talking, Ray and I were talking, I was saying I worked for the National Science Foundation before I went to Baltimore City, and you're not the only person I've talked to who said, you know, so when you go to them for funding, what directorate are you going to? And most people say, I'm going to the education directorate, or I'm going to the, you know, the social sciences directorate. And I said, this is something that the engineering directorate, the social sciences directorate, and the education directorate needs to be doing together. How do you have a conversation with somebody about an unsolicited proposal to fund a research study on this topic that covers architecture and design, sustainable buildings, you know, green successes, and educational outcomes.
Sustainable
You know, and the psychology of human behavior and education.
That's what we talk about when we talk about the triple bottom line, and we threw it up there for a second, but it was the concentric circle, you know, the Venn diagram with the different things. But I mean, this is, you know, I was just telling them the other day, it's like I had my aha moment. I was like, oh, I understand what that means now, even though I've been talking about it for like a year and a half, you know. But understanding how interrelated these things are, and for me, I shouldn't say us, but for me, I want to understand in my role how we're measuring success, you know, because ultimately, you know, it's about the investment, it's about the change, but it's how are we
prove it that
doing this, and if it's not test scores, or if it's not this or that, how do we shift the way we're evaluating things, therefore how are we shifting the way we're designing things, or talking about things, or advocating for things? Because if the measure of success is X, you know, it's like starting with the end in mind. You know, it's reverse engineering. How do we get there? And there may be many different paths, and there may be many different ways to connect to people who are coming from different camps. But if, you know, and we talked about it, you know, I think all of the other sheets of paper that Sean has talked about is what is, you know, whether we call it a shared vision or whatever, but I mean, to me, I'm like, I want to know, like, how do we do our job? And how do we share that information?
Yeah, forget the word vision, think about it in terms of a shared purpose. That's a better I think that's a better word. Because there's a sense of a shared purpose of where we want to go. Because vision, you know, as she said, I think is true. It's a buzzword. And everyone does visioning, but if you begin to talk about shared purpose, then I think that changes the context of the conversation.
So I think to your point, Mignon, I like the idea of going on the circuit, assuming somebody has like cab fare for me, but but beyond
We need that.
But I see it as an iterative thing, right?
Yeah,
So I
so
see
do I.
this group sort of helping to propel the conversation on some continuous basis, but at the same time with a research agenda sort of attached to it so that we kind of keep feeding that. So as we learn more from the research, that feeds into the conversation and
That's the
and
part
vice
that I don't
versa.
think is out there. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
that's what
what
a
we
lot of things,
Yeah.
and that one part is the kernel
Yeah.
that you could probably ride off of, that's different from what Harvard's doing, that's different from what, I mean, everyone's talking about it, but they're not talking about
What academic
really,
research?
yeah.
And it's not becoming a usable tool
Well, that's the
yet.
thing, I mean, one of the things I, have tried to do with my career is it's translating research into practice and making it actionable. And I was actually a student of Lorian's and really understanding how to take what we do in research and put it into the hands of the decision makers, whether they're designers or policymakers or what have you. And there are other like-minded folks and there are other organizations that have that mindset of bridging, and many of us around the table are part of those groups, so I think it's just trying to figure out how we speak the language. And
I think a lot of it goes back to Janice's point about data. I mean, that's important because there's no data collection across the country that collects data around the issues that are cited in this article that Jerry wrote. And it just happens that you guys are going to do next this type of meeting in Philadelphia, that Jerry's there, having done all the data that is going to further enhance this conversation. We don't have Jerry's all over our union, so we're kind of unfortunate in that space. But I mean, data is, I think, one of the drivers for the decision makers to actually do something that's impactful. And if we're going to talk about infrastructure at some point in this guy's administration or his term, we need to get involved in terms of.
For example, we don't even have a common tool, a common knowledge base of what's an adequate school.
Yes.
Right, yeah,
Physically.
there's no standard.
There's lots of studies out there that look at school building conditions, school building design, and student outcomes. But the measure of the quality of the school building differs from district to district.
Yes.
So it's related to outcomes, but what specifically is, so there's no national, there's no agreed upon concept of what we think we know, but there's no agreed upon metric for what is adequate school building as opposed to an excellent school building. And until we can develop that and think about that and agree upon that, God almighty, agree is over 50 states, God have mercy. But anyway, but that is a problem in the field as a researcher, that how can you compare something if you don't have the metric for it, which is also what Emily was talking about.
Even with the metric, oftentimes you'll find it's weighted differently in the planning
Well, that's what
consideration.
it's got to be agreed upon in order to say that this is how it's having an effect.
Yeah,
But you
well, I think
can't
that's an interesting
standardize learning,
That's right.
because it's
But you
individual.
can standardize the building.
Metrics. But if you identify which things you
I'm
can,
not sure that you can though.
You can
Oh, but they put together
define.
a common core, I'm just saying, I'm not saying it
Right, you
works.
can define what's adequate.
But I think that what's
What
interesting
is
though is if we're really doing sustainable design, every single building would be responsive to the context and climate in which they're built. And so they
Correct.
would not look the same.
And it
I think that
can.
there would be qualities
Well, it's
not I think that one of the things that's.
Qualities versus
Finding
quantities.
metrics of success, not
Yes.
necessarily
That's-
specific
Yeah.
parameters.
It goes
I
back
think
to
that's
function,
Yes.
it goes back to
They
function.
should be diverse.
the numbers, because I think the pushback that you're hearing a little bit is that, I think if we can pull out the things that we do know, or that we do need to find out, versus those that are criteria that are delivered in different ways for different
Right.
circumstances, and articulate that to the people who are listening, then we have a much better
Right.
success in
Yes.
getting people to, you know, to wrap their arms around what it is you're trying to achieve.
It's
But I
quantum
think really-
physics we're dealing with.
And-
Seriously. I mean,
Well,
it's-
and one of the failures of all those buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s is that they plunked the same building down in
Yes.
Arizona as they did in
No,
Massachusetts.
you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm not
No,
saying
no, I know,
that we
but
have
I
the
mean-
same building, but we have an agreed upon measure of how to
to
measure
evaluate.
a building.
Right, and we're saying the same thing, I
That's
think
what
that we just need to, when we describe to somebody what is adequate, they can't think that it's a prescriptive, like, model school.
No.
It doesn't work
And
out.
it's more like a list you can cross off,
It's
like I've done
qualities
this, so I get.
Or
that.
what is the difference between adequate and excellent?
One more point too, that also applies to if we do something like a collaboration with industry or a community, it varies from Alaska to Florida, right, in terms of design, because the level of industry that's most active, engineers in Florida are gonna have different sightings versus those in Alaska. So it's-
Oh, and that's why I think we started with outcomes, right, as the idea. So it's the results that matter, not the architecture, as a predetermined solution.
So, I think we're more or less done. For today. I mean, we are gonna memorialize
Yeah, we're
this.
gonna try and document this.
Right. I would also say if anybody still has some words left in them, I think we can head up to the roof with coffee, tea, soda, whatever, and cookies. Anybody who wants to, we can hang out up there as long as we want to. So, thank you, everybody, for spending this time.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you
That's
all.
really good.
Thank you for organizing this.
And hopefully we'll see you all probably maybe second, third week of January.
I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how it works.
How ambitious we can get.
As long as they're staying away from middle of February, everything's fine. Accreditation.
Let me know.